Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to, feels like the start of the new term, doesn't it? But welcome to today's meeting of the Children, Adults, Health and Wellbeing Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. As I like to do, I will ask everybody to introduce themselves. I think we should all have a name badge, and I think if the technology is working as I believe it should be, our names will be displayed on screens around the room as well. So don't move about because you'll be somebody else. Also, just to remember, if you finish speaking, then switch your microphone off because the camera follows the microphones about, and it would be better then for the camera to focus on the person who's responding to your question or the next person who's asking the question. So I think that's all I needed to say at that point. So my name's Dina Romero, and I am the chair of this panel. I'm a councillor in South Down, and I have a vote on any decisions that are taken here.
My name is Liz Hartman. I'm councillor for Poulton and vice chair of this committee.
David Harding, councillor for the Chew Valley, voting member.
Robin Moss, councillor for Westfield, substituting for Leslie Mansell.
Councillor Joanna Wright, Lambridge councillor, voting member.
Councillor Ron Karseni from Coombe Down, and I'm the voting member.
Councillor Paul Crossley, South Down, voting member.
So we need to get your mic adjusted, I think, because it came up as speaker 27 and not you, Paul. Kevin.
Thank you. Good morning. Kevin Burnett, representing Professional Association NAHT and non-voting member of the committee.
Chris might need adjusting, but Chris Batten is also in the room, and I'm sure will be sorted out in a moment. So then I'll turn to Kerry.
Good morning, Kerry Williams, designated scrutiny officer.
Good morning, everyone. Mark Duringford. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for the panel.
Thank you. Councillor May.
Yeah, everybody, I'm Paul May. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services and the Councillor for Pensford and Whitchurch Village on the edge of Bristol.
Good morning, everyone. Laura Ambler from the Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire Integrated Care Board. I'm the Director of Place for Baines.
Good morning, I'm Annette Luca. I'm a consultant in public health in the public health team in the local authority.
Good morning, I'm Amy McCullough. I'm also a consultant in public health in the public health team at Baines Council.
Good morning, Becky Reynolds, Director of Public Health and Prevention in the Council.
Rosie Phillips, Chief Exec, Development, Health and Independence.
Kate Morton, Chief Exec of Bathmind and the Chair of our infrastructure organisation 3SG.
I'm Becky Brooks, I'm the Director at 3SG.
And I'm Jill Kirk, I'm the Labour Group Assistant.
Hi, I'm Alison Bourne. I'm the lead member for Adult Social Care and Public Health, and I'm also a councillor for Woodcombe and Lincoln Ward.
I'm Suzanne Westhead, Director of Adult Social Care for Baines and North East Somerset Council.
Well, thank you, everybody. I don't think I've missed anybody. I'm just double checking. And I'd now like to pass to Mark to tell us what to do if there's an emergency.
Great, thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm does sound, we must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, we follow the green running person signs to the exit, using either the marble staircase or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is the Orange Grove grassed area, just outside Brown's Restaurant. There is an evacuation chair for use by disabled people who so wish in the corridor outside the Council Chamber Public Gallery. Alternatively, the area at the top of the marble staircase has been designated a safe refuge where persons needing assistance should assemble. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. So, apologies for absence and substitutions.
As Councillor Moss said, he's here for Councillor Leslie Mansell, and we've received apologies from Councillor Pancania.
Thank you very much, Mark. Declarations of interest, please.
I'd like to declare I have a personal interest in 3SG and one of their support groups, community groups.
Do I have any other declarations of interest? As is normal procedure, if you do suddenly think, actually, I need to declare something, then please let me know during the course of this meeting as soon as you are able. Okay, I'm now moving on to urgent business, and I'm going to ask Councillor May to give a short report at this point. So I know he needs to leave early.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I've got to do this fairly quickly because I've got to leave by 10:15, but I just wanted to make sure that the committee was brought up to date with regards to Charlton House. You'll remember recently Charlton House was closed down as an adult care home, and it's been discussed at this committee and at Cabinet about this being recycled, if you like, as a children's home, which would be around providing 12 residential places and 18 day places for young people with special education needs and disabilities, and in particular picking up autism and SAMD. Is part of the safety valve, so the Council has the money already, although we're still awaiting the approval of the safety valve by the Department for Education, which has been put on hold a little bit with the new government. And I think the important thing really is just to note that the issue is about offering savings to the Council in terms of a very expensive budget we have in children's services, but also it means going to mean a lot less travelling for young people and for their families. And I think that's where I've been driven by the needs of that in particular. So the hope is we're going to move forward into making a planning application, and we're moving forward to get approval from the DFE around the scheme, and also to make sure that we then actually get a new provider to work in the home. So I was told that the officers wanted to report to the next PDS committee, but I was a bit worried that there's stuff going out in the press, and it was important. I thought that I should be accountable to this committee and report at this time. So it's to note, but it is really just to say that that scheme is progressing really quite well, and I hope that everybody can be kept informed. The important thing in my mind is making sure that we consult with the local people, and that would be part of the planning application when we get to that stage.
Thank you very much. Chair. Thank you very much, Paul. I think it's really commendable that you have taken the opportunity to report, even though it's not your it's not like your scrutiny today. But thank you. So I've got a couple of questions, I think, for you. So Kevin first.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Paul. Could you just clarify, please, whether the funding for the change to the new residential stroke day centre is separate to the safety valve funding from the government, that there was a grant coming through that the council applied separately for, or is it all tied up with the safety valve?
That's a very good question. As I understand it, it is tied in with the safety valve, but the £4 million was a grant that the government have already given to the council, and the £6 million we're talking about here is some additional DSG funding which is going into it, because it's going to generate long-term savings for the dedicated schools grant.
Thank you. And actually, that's just reminded me, I think at some point we might want to ensure we have a glossary of popular acronyms and maybe little descriptions of things like terms like safety valve as well, just to help anybody who's either new to the panel or who's watching and isn't aware of what these terms or acronyms mean.
And Chair, I've already promised that we'll give a full report back on safety valve when we hear back from the Department for Education, because I do think it's something that is a major issue for the Council, not just Children's Services, because the potential risk is significant, and the new government has talks about its black hole, but quite clearly it's one of the major issues in government funding, because lots and lots of local authorities are adversely affected by safety valve.
And I think you may have successfully preempted Liz's question as well. Liz, did you have any other questions? Are there any other questions for the panel? Joe?
Hi, I have separate questions to Charlton House, but well done on getting that moving forward. I have been contacted by a resident about EHCPs, Education, Health and Care Plans. It is you that I asked this, isn't it? So how many EHCPs within Baines aren't issued within the statutory timescale of 20 weeks after the decision is taken to carry out a needs assessment? How does the number compare to national average? And what are the main causes for Baines to not issue ECHPs within the statutory timescale? And I also have a further question. Should the new government put VAT on private schools, how will that impact special educational needs within the district?
Can I say, Councillor May, if you wish, you can bring the answers back on these questions when you bring your own statement on the rest of your portfolio in October.
Chair, and if you'd like to put that question to me in writing, I'll make sure we get the answer to you, but we'll also deal with it through the next committee.
Thank you. And then I just had a question specifically about Charlton House. So I appreciate that it's not gone through planning yet, but is the expectation that this house will be filled with children who are Baines children, or is the expectation that there will be surplus places and therefore will be importing children?
Very specifically, Chairman, it will be for children within the Bath and North East Somerset area. If that was your question.
It is, because
yes.
Obviously it's about the bigger picture. Obviously part of this is around, yes. Savings in homeschool transport, etc. So obviously it's not very helpful if it's then filled with children from elsewhere. So is that going to be part of the planning requirement then?
I can't speak on behalf of planning, obviously, as you would expect. But the simple fact is that we send children outside of the area because we don't have provision within the area. And this is a small step towards providing that provision within area, which is better in terms of finances, which in my report I've highlighted that. But the simple fact is it's also better for the children and it's better for their families. So that's the reason why I feel so passionately about it. I'm hoping as we move forward there may be other proposals brought forward about children who have to be taken outside of the area, both in terms of children in care and SEND. And as you know, we've had approval for a large provision, a large school at the Colderhay side, which is being progressed, and we're hoping that that will be moving forward soon. All of these things, of course, take time, but it is about the future of children within the area of Bath and North East Somerset.
Thank you, Councillor May, and I know that we would all support having the right provision for children so that it is nearer to where they live, so they're nearer to their own communities as well. So thank you very much. I was going to say we have no further questions, but Joe has just beaten me to that.
So I just have one further question on that, and I'm sure your motives are very good in this case, but we might have a different cabinet and a different political group in place, and there might be money to be made from us selling off those places to other authorities because we can make more money from them. And I just wonder what provision we can make as a council to ensure that local young people get those places and nobody else does.
That's a very similar question as the one I asked as well, so
Yes.
I'm not sure that there is anything, but I'd be interested in your response.
Well, I think, as I understand it, this is directly being provided for children within Bath and North East Somerset. We've got 3 special care centres around the area, and there has been an issue where parents do send their children to those schools, but that is separate to what we're talking about here. And the aim is quite clearly to deal with children within Bath and North East Somerset.
Kevin, and this is, I think, going to be the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really just a follow-up on both of your questions, really. Is it possible to get a clarification, probably for the next meeting, around the admission criteria? Because my understanding of the special schools admission criteria is they can't specifically say we're only giving this to Bath and North East Somerset children, but I would hopefully think I'm wrong. But it would be very helpful to get a clarification on the admission criteria and what that process would be, please.
Quite specifically, yes, I will, Chair. I'll make sure that's reported. I don't think it can be cast iron, but the number of children that we've got that have got a need for that within the area are the ones that will be allocated to that site initially. But that's the reason that the Department for Education hopefully will agree this scheme moving forward, because it is for the needs of children within Bath and North East Somerset.
Thank you very much for everyone's questions and for your statement, Councillor May. Right, I'm now moving on to items from the public or councillors, and I believe I have Becky Brooks who wishes to make a statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you all this morning. On behalf of the third sector in Baines and as the Director of 3SG, which supports 250 charities across the area, I'd like to update the panel on the re-procurement of community contracts from the sector's perspective. At the beginning of this year, we were told that there would be no cliff edge in funding and that the Council would work in collaboration with us as valued partners. Whilst I am grateful for the effort that's been made in opening up conversations with myself in the last month or so, until last week the sector was largely in the dark about timelines and, as far as I'm aware, has had little interaction in terms of collaboration or consultation. The sector still doesn't know what cuts are coming and where, and this has created huge anxiety, uncertainty and difficulty in making plans for the future. We are yet to see the outcomes of the Community Services Review, despite having asked for it over several months. This is disappointing because it would be helpful to know where cuts will fall and to understand the Council's thinking. We hope that there will be an open dialogue around this piece of work, and as far as I'm aware, this has not been the case, as was promised at the beginning of this year. If this review is in another format, which I've been told that it is, we would still like to see it where commercial sensitivities allow. Whilst I appreciate that the Council has had a busy and pressured time with adult social care coming back in-house and now a CQC inspection, the third sector desperately needs the Council to start communicating more effectively, trusting it as equal partners to deliver services. Real change is needed for the future of procurement in Baines, and in January we were asking for that brave and bold piece of work to be done. Having had conversations with the Baines Commissioner, I can see that this is a huge piece of work that couldn't be done in less than a year, but we are committed to pushing for this change, for greater co-production, trust and better communication. There are great examples of work not too far from Baines where this system has more flexibility, a willingness to invest and sustain, and a grassroots understanding of the challenges of those delivering services. Such systems are where you truly become a valued partner. I would like to direct members' attention to the recent council tender in Swindon, in which the Swindon Carers Centre, supporting residents for over 25 years, had to withdraw because the ask was completely unachievable for the money offered. It also meant the charity would need to close as a result of losing such a large contract. I cannot imagine what Baines would look like without its Carers Centre, and I am genuinely concerned that this scenario could play out with other charities in Baines, and who picks up services then. As of last week, we received confirmation that market engagement events are likely to take place at the end of September and early October. It is unlikely that would-be providers will go into procurement until the end of the year, and that temporary contracts are likely going to be needed to sustain services. The housing and homelessness review is also being treated separately, causing even more uncertainty and confusion, whilst we understand that early help contracts are being worked on for 2026. Our ask is that Commissioners use this time to listen and engage with the sector in a more open way. 3SG is in the process of organising 2 sessions with a national procurement expert, and we hope that Commissioners and the Council's legal team will support this vital piece of work. Whilst we have supported the co-hosting of 2 sessions for providers with the Council this year, this has provided nothing new in terms of information, nor the opportunity for new solutions or dialogue. Members of this panel hopefully know of Baines' Community Wellbeing Hub, an example of where tearing up the rulebook and cross-sector collaboration has seen proven prevention results and is held up as good practice nationally. We need to rekindle that pandemic spirit, to move away from transactional relationships, with an emphasis on co-production and trust on both sides, and exploring the art of the possible. BNSSG has managed to do some really interesting work in this space, and we urge Baines Council to take a look at its brave neighbours who recognise that ultimately we all have to evolve our systems to thrive in future. And that is what Baines deserves: a strong, thriving third sector providing sustainable, exemplary services for residents.
Thank you, Becky. I don't know whether or not Kate or Rosie wanted to add anything to your statement. No? Thank you. Do we have any questions from the panel? Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose listening to your statement, the first reaction is great disappointment. As my understanding way back before the summer break was that we would be looking, or the Council would be looking at what services should be offered, how that might look, and be very much in partnership with you. What do you see as, from your point of view, the most immediate steps to be taken now to try and get this back on track for you?
We hope that we'll use this period now between market engagement and procurement to try and do some of that work that we hoped would take place during this year. I know that there have been other pressures on the Council, but we feel like a lot of this work has been done behind closed doors. 3SG, for example, has between 8 to 10 trustees of large charities and small charities on our trustee board, and speaking to them, we know that there hasn't been that work done with those charities, so I'm not sure if any work's happened anywhere else. We know that the Council's been doing work on things like the carers strategy, so I suspect that there's work being happening with some of our caring charities. But we would really love, and I think today is a plea just really to really let us in and work with us in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Robin and then Joanna.
Thank you. I assume we'll be continuing this discussion in report from Alison later on. I think it's...
Yeah, I will give Alison a moment to address that at the beginning of her update.
Just observe to Becky, because I know she's spoken to this panel and others on numerous occasions about this, that it's disappointing that we are where we are. I think it's also worrying as well at the time that we've got CQC interviews, and actually our relationship with the third sector is an important part of that. But it's disappointing that we're at this point. And I think to remind ourselves that the initial budget proposal from the Cabinet was that these cuts, the £803,000, be made over one financial year. Because of pressure from Scrutiny, that was extended to 2, and I have to say it does feel like we've lost that year that Scrutiny actually added to this process.
Thank you. Becky, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that.
I have spoken to Mark Elliott because I was trying to see if we could sort of push this along a little bit, because I know it's been tricky to get some momentum on it from our perspective. And I asked if we could have a sort of a year's grace, but I understand that that's not possible, because I feel like we could have done the year we should have had maybe next year, but I think because of some kind of procurement laws we're not able to do that, unfortunately. But we have said that we're really willing to do the work and to try and help if there's a system change going into 2025, to see if we can make those changes going forward in this procurement process, because there should be more done in terms of that co-production piece. And for those commissioners that are making decisions to really understand the challenges that third sector faces in terms of delivering contracts, they need to have that understanding so they can work closely together and get the best outcome for residents, because that's what we all want at the end of the day.
Thank you, Becky. Did you have a follow-up question, Robin? Okay. I actually have a follow-up question for that, which is just a point of clarification, which is, is it your understanding that the 800,000 or thereabouts will still need to be found in this financial year, or is that being moved to?
Some clarification around that, we're not sure. We don't know.
Robin?
For clarification, I think the 802 was initially supposed to be taken out of this financial year, but the amendment that came to the budget meeting in February extended that into 25-26, but there isn't anything appearing in any of the quarterly returns as how to that scaled over those 8 quarters. And I know that the indication from Mark is that that can't be extended. I have to say, I don't necessarily bring party political elements into this, but it will be there will be amendments made to the budget in February if that isn't included in Mark as a firing or an amendment into 25-26. And certainly I hope that it'll be something for scrutiny panels to discuss as well, to recommend to Cabinet that the extension be made into the 3rd year, as we've lost a year on this.
So just coming back to you, Robin, I assume then that this is a point that you'll be picking up in your own panel as the chair of the resources panel. Thank you. And obviously there will be, when you come to your report, Alison, I hope you'll be able to, maybe there'll be a moment to clarify that point too. Liz.
Thank you, Becky. It's been mentioned that there are 55 services and 22 providers, or 22 providers providing 55 services. Is a huge amount. And you said because lack of consultation with you and worries about the procurement progress, which I think you've mentioned that you're very aware of, but there are ways around this. And you've also said that there are going to be interim contracts, and that's not very satisfactory. Is there any way that this can be overcome, that steps can be taken to move contracts forward so that we don't have interim contracts?
I'm not sure, Councillor Hardman. I think that's something we'll be asking. Kate's just made a very good point in my ear, if we may, Chair.
Thanks. So I just think we need to clarify that as business leaders, we've got staff who are employed, and we've got to make some decisions quite quickly for those staff if we have to make them redundant, put them on notice, etc. This is people we're playing with, so we need to be very, very careful when we look at contracts. And I agree, Councillor Hardman, we don't know the answer to that, and I think that's clarity we need around the interim contracts and how we manage that going forward. Thank you.
I wonder also if this could be another element of the work that Robin's panel could look at. Joanna.
Hi, thank you very much for your statements. It is very disappointing, and I'm a bit confused myself, Chair, because I know that we, as a panel, have repeatedly asked officers about that process, and were told that process was in hand, and that those discussions were taking place, and there was nothing to be worried about. So, therefore, to have you come here to tell us those discussions haven't taken place and you are worried doesn't add up to the conversations that we've been given. The point about co-production seems to be really important to you in your statement, that you want to work with council officers in a process working through, and there doesn't seem to be any way to generate that discussion. So I'm just wondering if there's some way that we, as councillors, can be an advocacy role and actually have a forum outside of this meeting where we bring various groups together and actually create some spaces where something takes place, because at the moment none of those conversations are happening. Or And therefore, how do we move this forward? And there doesn't seem to be a role to move this forward. So I think it's awful to hear, because at the end of the day, all of our residents will be failed because it will cost us more. And I also worry about the issue of contracts and officers understanding the business that you're running with the world that I can see that the civil service runs, and how maybe the two don't understand just the timelines that you have to face compared to the timelines they have to face. We really need to hear more from the cabinet member on this and from directors on this, because we're not getting the right answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. And I think, yes, I think we will all be listening with great interest to the cabinet member when she puts her report forward on and picks up these points. So it is possible that we could have some sort of forum, as you suggest, but I think we will need to wait and see what the cabinet member's response is, and then see where we go from there. Do we have any other questions for Becky? In which case, can I say thank you very much, Becky, and to Rosie and to Kate as well for coming, and I'm sure you'll want to stay to hear what the cabinet member is going to say. And I'm sure you will also keep us informed as to how discussions go from now on as well. Thank you. So I was expecting another member of the public to come and speak, and I do not see her in the room, so I think we will leave that one for now. And then I'll ask Alison if you'd like to obviously respond to Becky's comments and also add anything else to your report that you've already given us.
Okay, thank you. I've been away for the last couple of weeks. This is my first day back, so apologies that I may not be quite as up to date on all the issues as I might have been, although I have been keeping an eye on my emails, and I haven't seen anything that's prepared me for this discussion this morning. But anyway, I will do my best. My report covers three main areas, and I think the one that probably people want to talk about most, bearing what we've discussed so far, is the community partners update. The other two areas are the fact that we're having this CPC inspection this week. That starts tomorrow and finishes on Thursday. And there's obviously been a lot of work done ahead of the inspectors actually arriving in preparation for that. And that's included a presentation that took place about a month ago now. So yes, we will have inspectors in, and they will be talking mainly to frontline staff this week, but we have sent them enormous amounts of data as preparation for that, and we've met with them online. The other thing just to mention is the age-friendly communities, which I'm sure most people are aware went to the last full council meeting and was fully supported by council, and that's an initiative that is being led locally by Age UK, and we are working in partnership with them on it. It's aiming to support Baines to become an age-friendly community, a place where people can age well and feel supported to age in the way that meets their needs. So going back to the community partners update, I absolutely appreciate that this is really difficult for our community partners. And when the proposals first came out earlier in the year that £802,000 a year should be saved from their community budgets, I found it very difficult as well, as did my colleagues. It wasn't an easy thing to face, and it wasn't something that we wanted to do, but we obviously have to live within our means, and that was felt to be one of the areas where we would need to make savings. Because of the concerns about it, we determined that we wouldn't just be making £802,000 savings, that we would be conducting a full review of all our community services, and we would then be using the information gained from that review to recommission those services, potentially with a smaller budget to reflect the savings that we had to make. However, it was also agreed at that time that if the savings that we made were going to mean that we were spending more in other areas of adult social care, and that it was actually going to cost the council more to make the savings than the savings we would make, then they wouldn't necessarily go ahead. So that remains under review, because we still haven't finished the piece of work, so we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. The other thing that we agreed was that the savings would be phased over 2 years. So the target for this financial year is 401,000, and there's a further 401 for next year. Bearing in mind that caveat that we don't yet know the decisions we're taking, but it was also agreed that the savings would be taken through the whole quantum of adult social care funding, not necessarily the third sector. So that's the financial context of it. And I felt we'd been clear about that, but I'm very happy to reiterate it. The other things to say are that, as I've said in the report, that the commissioners have now completed their baseline of the current contracts, which has been a really complex piece of work. And I think it's become clear to us that the original timescale we had for doing this work is probably unrealistic, to actually do the review, to work with the providers on the recommissioning, and then to go through the formal recommissioning process, which, because of procurement rules, we then are not so able to work with our providers. We have to step back and go through a very formal legal process at that time. But while we're working towards that, our intention was to work with our local providers on looking at what the shape of future services should be. We did have a workshop in June, I think it was, and now that we've finished the baseline assessment, the intention is to have 2 further workshops with local providers, which are scheduled, one for later this month and one for October, I think. And obviously, you know, we will be wanting to work with the enormous amount of knowledge that our local providers have to ensure that we come up with the best proposals for local services. You know, that's fully our intention, and I appreciate that it may feel like you've not been as engaged in it as you have, but I think the baselining work had to be done by the commissioning team. I mean, obviously they've taken work from the providers, but that was a sort of technical piece of work that had to be done to look at the needs assessment. We're now more into the engagement process, which will be more about co-production, as we've done with the carers on the carers assessment. So that's certainly what I'm expecting, and from the meetings that are scheduled, that's what I think is going to happen. And as I said, I think we are, unfortunately, going to have to look at interim contracts so that we can do this piece of work properly, but I think that's better than having gaps in services and then starting again. So we will hope to work with our third sector partners to try and smooth things over as much as possible and get the best outcomes for our residents and also for those providers who I fully understand have got, you know, staff to pay, services to provide. They need to be engaged in the process and understanding what's happening.
Thank you, Alison. Is there any questions from any of our panel? Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still a little confused, Alison, and forgive me. Why were the commissioners reviewing the services alone without the involvement of the actual services themselves in terms of what they were providing and how they were providing it? And because that seems to be that if you're trying to get a baseline of what is actually happening, surely they have to talk with you about what is actually being provided?
I'm going to try and answer that question. Thank you, Becky, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been really helpful to hear what you've said, and I'm really sorry that you feel that way. And I think it's important to say that, and we can turn this around. So I think that's important to say. Coming back to your point about the baseline is an assessment of all of the provisions. So it's big, huge spreadsheets about how many of that and how many of this. That's what the baseline is. The plan is there is a strategic group that Mandy Bishop chairs, which Councillor May and Councillor Bourne attend and get the feedback there. So what we will do from now on is the next 2 engagement events will pull all of those spreadsheets together and say, this is the themes, this is the work, this is where we need to start. It is worth me saying we've agreed to maintain current levels of funding to ensure service continuity. So we are not going to be stopping any funding. We've made that very clear. I've had to make sure that 802k is found elsewhere in my budget, and I've agreed that, with Councillor Elliott. So I just want to reiterate that again. There is no intention for us at this time to take any funding from the third sector for this year. And I'm only saying this year because I don't know how the engagement events will go in September and October. Now, we have had, as Alison has said, we've had the engagement event in June. Then there was a training event that happened from our head of procurement, talking to the third sector and understanding some of the issues around procurement. We're also having a training which is going to be about different models of commissioning, which Becky and Natalia Laku, who's the Assistant Director of Commissioning, is working on and planning for us. Then we have our 2 engagement events. Then we stop and we say, OK, this is where we need to go. And this is why today has been really helpful, because there is an issue, I think. We understood we were doing as best we could around our procurement and around our engagement. It feels like that's a bit off kilter. So what I'm going to do now is I take this back to Mandy. Mandy's back from leave. Today, I think we just need to reset this. We need to do a bit of work. We need to make sure that we've got the voices of our third sector. We've got a brilliant third sector, probably I feel the best in the country. And I've worked in 5 different councils. So I think we can take this back, we can do a bit more work, and I think I'd like to be engaged much more with Becky and Mandy rather than it staying up at the strategic level. So that's my commitment as Director of Adult Social Care, and I'm really pleased that you took the time today to do this, because I wasn't aware of it, so I'm really pleased. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I think we all welcome that commitment, and I would also ask that you come back in November and share with us exactly where we are, and hopefully Becky and/or Kate and Rosie can come and we'll confirm how well that new conversation is going. And how we are striving forward. Can I just ask you just to confirm one thing, though? You did say that you were no longer going to be taking 802,000 from your budget. Is that for this year and next year? Or, and you said savings were going to come from elsewhere.
It comes from my budget. That savings of it's 401 this year. That comes from my budget. It does not come from our community partners. It comes from Adult Social Care overall.
Okay, so I'm going to charge Robin with looking at the detail of that one. Okay, thank you. Thank you for taking on that job. I'm sorry, there were lots of hands that went up, and I think it was Joanna first and then Robin. Well, I'm going to let you go first, Jo.
For that statement, 2 questions. The third sector, do you know how much money they essentially spend each year? What their services, in terms of what they do? What is that overall figure? What is that figure?
I can't tell you offhand. I want to get it right, but I can put it in for the minutes. I just want to make sure that I've got every penny right. Yeah, but I do.
Roughly,
I have that figure.
Are we talking like 1 million, 10 million, 20 million, roughly?
Yeah, it's just over 3.5 million.
Okay,
but
so
I want to get that figure right,
okay.
the right amount. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's from the adult social care section of it. There's also a housing section, and that's why I want to come back to you with the exact figure, because we have the exact figure.
Because I think it's very important for us to understand just how big that sector is and what it does, and if you take away a big chunk of it, what the impact that can be. So I think those kind of figures are useful. And then to the Cabinet Member, Councillor Bourne, I would say, in terms of your leadership role, we're clearly hearing from the third sector they want support and they want to have a better conversation with the council. How are you going to do that?
Well, I'm very happy to talk to third sector partners about what they would like to change and to be different. But I will also be talking to my colleagues, the officers, about ensuring that the concerns that have been raised today are being addressed.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, and thank you for saying something, Alison, and from Suzanne about where we are. I think it's useful to hear that the 802 over 2 years is the global budget and not specifically to the voluntary sector. And effectively, it's over 8 quarters, £100,000 per quarter. It would be useful at some point because while it's good to hear that the 802 is spread across the whole department, still within the budget framework, it's down as 802 taken from over 2 years from that particular granting head. So if you could point me in the right part of the Q1 returns to where Q1, which is 100,000, where that money has come from, whether it's deferred, how it's happening, that would be useful. I think as well, thank you for saying come back with more of a report in November, because of course November is the time that scrutiny panels are looking at next year's budget. And again, looking back, we had the joint scrutiny panel meeting on the 23rd of January this year, and that was all 3 scrutiny panels. And the one issue that came top of everybody's list, and was the one issue I remember saying at the time, was this particular element of funding. And my guess is, unfortunately, it's going to be top of the list when it comes to looking individual panels in November, December, and reporting back to the whole corporate meeting, which again I believe will be in January as well. Can I say as well, I agree with Joe, it's useful to actually see where the 3 million plus into the vol sector goes. I think we don't want to underestimate how important that 3 million is in terms of leverage for other money that brings in. But losing that, you lose economies of scale within organisations, so you threaten services, and the knock-on effect is a great deal more than 800,000, 3 million, whatever. And I agree with Suzanne, I think there's lots to be proud of and to be grateful for the vol sector and the services they provide within Bath and North East Somerset. I have to say, being a councillor now for over 10 years, there's a great deal of catch-up has happened over the last 10 years, because when I first came to Baines, I would say it was substantially behind other local authorities in terms of consultation support and infrastructure support. So it's great that where we are, but we do not want to end up in the situation as in Swindon, where a consultation process effectively crashes part of the sector. So it would be good to see some kind of work done into the global picture about the sector, but I appreciate it's busy times. It doesn't matter how many times you weigh the pig and measure the pig, it doesn't make it happier or healthier. So while it's a piece of work that needs doing, it doesn't need to be done to the detriment of other pieces of work, like consultation with. I would just make one final observation, and that is that there, and it's following on from what Joe said, those reports back to minutes on the 10th of June and I believe meeting in July. And I've got the PDS minutes for the 10th of June. I think we probably need to be a bit more careful when it comes to minutes and actually look at our contribution to minutes, because from what I can see, I'm not sure that those minutes are entirely accurate in what the relationship is and what discussions are taking place between Baines and the voluntary sector. That's a responsibility on all of us to not to give us false reassurance as councillors and as councillors, to make sure we check on minutes. So, yeah, that's me for the minute.
Just to pick up on that last point you made, are you saying that the minutes were not an accurate record of what was actually said, or are you saying that what was said might not be a proper reflection of what was the situation was?
Yes, Dina.
Thank you very much, Robin. Okay, so on car.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I got a question on the update, the community partner update. So what steps are being taken to ensure continuity of service provision during the recommissioning process, especially considering the potential delays?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. We will, as I said earlier on, we'll continue to fund the third sector in the way that we've previously been doing. So people who are using the services will not be affected. However, what I would say, and I think my community partners would support this, is that they haven't seen any uplift in, I want to say 10 years, but it might be less, in 10 years. And that's the area of risk for us, and that's the area of risk that we're reviewing at the moment. So funding will continue until we've done our engagement events and we've worked through with the third sector, and then we'll have to work through the risks as well with the third sector. Because if you're going to take a certain proportion of money from any sector, you're going to have to make sure that we manage and protect the residents within that. So I think I would suggest coming back in November, we should have a risk assessment, which we'll share with you as well about impact on residents if there is going to be one.
Thank you. And just a quick second one. So how will the needs assessment data impact the future commissioning of services for housing, learning, disability and mental health?
Thank you again for that question. We will focus on both for housing and for adult social care, because they're the two main sectors for the third sector. For me, it'll be very much around our Care Act responsibilities, so our carers, our integration, our responsibility around prevention, and they will be the key areas of work. And actually, if you look at the areas of work that the third sector do at the moment, there is a range of different things that they've done, so we'll work with them to find a way forward. We're not there yet.
I'll take the opportunity then to ask a few of my own questions. So you mentioned the unrealistic timescales. Have you got some sense, though, of what a realistic timescale looks like, and is that something that you can then share, not necessarily right now, but at an early stage with our third sector colleagues?
I don't think I ever said it was an unrealistic timetable in the time that we said over 2 years. I think we have work to do around the timetable. We've got a meeting next week, and I think everyone is asking me for a timetable and asking me when are we going to do this, when are we going to do that. I'm hoping that when we come back in November, we'll have a timetable that will be agreed with the third sector as well. So I don't want to come back here and give you a timetable. I want to be able to speak to Becky and say, this is what we're thinking of, how would this work for you? So we need to come back with that.
Thank you. And then it's kind of picking up a point that Robin was talking about, which is the work of the voluntary sector, and I guess it's the sort of the edges of that work where they may not overlap, but they certainly touch other services, other organisations' work, and that's not necessarily always factored in, you know, when you're sort of working up your contract. So how will you pick up that kind of slightly more nuanced, the sort of the bit that actually sometimes is the bit that makes the real difference?
That's why we did the baseline assessment, because I think there's a number of charities in particular out there who are doing quite a bit of work within the third sector. And the baseline assessment was about that, to try and see if they mightn't be getting large bits of funding, they mightn't even be getting any bit of funding, but they may be supporting the third sector in that. So we were trying to capture that as part of the theme when we were doing the baseline assessment. But it's a really good point, because I think there's a hidden community out there who absolutely supports the council and may not be getting little or no funding for that because they're in the charity base.
Well, they're just simply not being recognised for the work they do, very much like unpaid carers, for example. And then one last question from me, which is around, so we know the CQC are coming in this week. Is it your understanding that they will be having meetings with 3SG and others in the third sector?
CQC have been really specific about who they will and won't speak to, and they're managing their own diary as well, which is quite interesting because that's not the same as Ofsted. So we've put people's names up and asked them, to interview them. I do know that they're interviewing a number of the third sector, but not 3SG, even though we have put the name up for 3SG, but I don't think they've asked for that.
I'll ask Kate just to come back on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. So we've been asked, for example, and I think a couple of other organisations have been asked. So 3SG, no, but third sector organisations, yes. So there's an interview tomorrow morning.
To that, they spent a lot of time in the carers centre. They actually based themselves in the carers centre speaking to carers. So from their point of view, they want to speak directly to the people who receive services and directly to the people who give services. So that they didn't feel that with 3SG, because it's a strategic organisation, they knew the detail of what's happening down the ground, and that's what they're about, really. It's their level of assurance, so that's why they're doing it in that way, CQC.
Thank you. Joanna.
For you, Dina, as chair, I'm just wondering that, we know that November meeting we've asked for various things to come back to us, but between September and November, I don't think anybody in this panel wants this to drift further than it already seems to have. So I just wonder, in your role as chair, how could you chase that, the requests essentially that we have, that there is a co-production and more of a conversation are in place, take place. I just wonder what that role could be for you in this. Sorry to give you a job.
Thank you, Jo. Okay, I will follow that up. Okay, thank you. Becky.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I am really disappointed that that baseline assessment hasn't involved the sector, because I think there is some information that we might have had that could have helped with that process. So I do feel quite disappointed, well, very disappointed about that on behalf of the organisations that we represent. I also do take a little bit of umbrage in terms of the workshops that were mentioned, because, and this has been sort of the style of what what's been going on so far, and what we're asking for in terms of that co-production, is that the workshops have not been sort of that open dialogue in terms of how can we do things differently. They've been a lot of, this is how we want you to do it, or this is what we're working with. And what I'm really concerned about in terms of market engagement and those events that might come up is that we'll get to market engagement and it'll be, here's our budget, here's what we want you to do with it. You go, you decide how you're going to do this. And actually, if we'd had those conversations in the lead up to that, we wouldn't be in that position, because organisations potentially might have to make very quick decisions to fit into this mould. And if we'd had those discussions in the lead up to that, we would have stood a much better chance of strengthening and doing that better work together. And that's what we're really asking for, is to be heard. And I know it's difficult in terms of procurement law, and I know it's hard to have those conversations, but if we're not going into procurement, I would just really want to work with you and to be able to feed in. They have all the knowledge, they know what they're doing, and we just need to be heard and get into that space.
Thank you, Becky. And I saw Suzanne was nodding, so I assume that's confirmation that that will happen. Thank you, and I'm sure Mark is minuting that, yes. Thank you. Is there any other points anyone wants to raise on the Cabinet members' report? I think... Oh, of course, Rosie.
Sorry, can I just have a bit of clarity around the housing and homelessness review? Because I think I'm confused, because that hasn't been part of the community services review, where there's been limited discussion with 3SG. So where does that sit within this? And I guess from my perspective, I think just transparency around the reviews, so the community services review and the housing homelessness review. Can we see the reports? And then maybe I'm scaling back expectation from co-production to just consultation. From that, what is the what is the outcome of those reviews? What's the suggestion officers make so that we can then at least have an opportunity to comment back? Because I think consultation and just being able to kind of give that critical eye, we're not going to be, everybody's not going to be happy. I think that's probably fairly obvious, but there may be something useful from consultation if we can see the reviews that would be good to be involved in. So that, and then the timescale and process, that would be what I would like to see. And then, as I say, just a bit of clarity about how housing and homelessness is being brought into that process.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to see what Suzanne says first, but I'm aware that the housing and targets and things like that is coming to the climate emergency panel in November, but it's not quite the same, I think, as what you're asking for. So I'm going to ask Suzanne for a response first.
I'll just attempt to respond.
In fact, maybe it'll be Alison.
Yeah, that is something that will come to the strategic board. I haven't yet seen the baseline assessment, and I've been asking about it. My understanding was that it is going to go to the strategic board, and I want to look at how housing fits with that, with the community services. It's slightly complicated because there's a different cabinet lead for housing, which is Matt McCabe, and he hasn't been attending the boards on a regular basis. Paul May and I both have, but the agreement was that Matt would input as and when he was needed. So, yes, I think we're all asking those questions, and it's something that we should have an answer to quite soon, but at the moment I don't.
So, if it's possible, could we have as part of the update in November, a line or two on that, but obviously don't wait until November to do that piece of work. I'm sure you wouldn't be.
Of course, and I think it is worth noting that the 802,000 that was first proposed, that included housing. It wasn't just adult social care, it's adult social care and housing. So it's a question that we are all keen to answer.
Thank you. You have just reminded me another piece then, which was, in addition, I think, to that 800,000, there was some more savings that were being required, I think, through children's services. So it would be good also to have an update on exactly how that's being addressed. And I know Becky will be speaking for voluntary sector organisations for that as well, but obviously this panel has been focusing predominantly on adult social care, or this meeting has been. Okay, one last...
You may want to look at that at your next children's panel meeting.
I think we will do. Thank you, Alison. Kevin.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. Thank you. I didn't realise we were on the actual report. Sorry, I thought we were just on the community update. Just two quick things. One was just a comment, which is best wishes for the inspection and to all those involved and concerned, and for all the hard work that goes into that. And can I just ask, is there on page 2, under Ageing Well, is there any separate information on the 8 domains? We were asked for comments, but I wasn't quite sure whether there's a link or something else to look at.
Yes, there is a link, because I had to look it up myself when we first started talking about it, for the World Health Organization. If you go, we can send the link for you, but it does give you the 8 domains and explains it quite well in there as well. So we can get that link for you.
Robin.
Yes, on the report generally. Just a question about the age-friendly community policy that was passed at full council. It would be useful to have some kind of feedback at some point. I think we're very good as councillors at passing policies and kind words at council meetings, but not actually following up what happens to them.
And actually that fits with the discussion we've been having as well, doesn't it, about the role of the voluntary sector too. Okay, any more questions on the Cabinet Members' update? Thank you very much, Alison and Suzanne, and also from Becky and Kate and Rosie for your contributions as well. You may have noticed that I did skip over the minutes in order to sort of have a bit more of a seamless conversation, but I'm now going to go back to the minutes and ask if there's any corrections or any, yeah, let's go with corrections first. Are the minutes correct? No. Let's go with Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, just a minor point of accuracy. Just bottom of page 7, the last paragraph, I think it's supposed to say 3 inspectors as a point of accuracy. Do you want me doing it to raise the other points under?
Yes, please. Do it all at once.
Okay. So on page 6 of the minutes, the Community Summit summary and the HERS question, no other information seems to have been received as yet. I hope to be corrected on that, but I haven't got anything. Page 9-10, there is a question around the public health addressing the point of access to the leisure provision on the Culverhays site. Page 16, there was a question raised around how many schools involved in PINs were in Radstock. Page 19, how many people accessing free school meals that were eligible. Page 21, funding for preventative work around knife crime. Again, whether public health might take this on as a public health duty, or whether it might come through the Police and Crime Commissioner, which Councillor May was going to follow up. And I think that's all the points I have, Chair.
Thank you. So, Mark, I'm sure will dutifully amend as appropriate. But there are some points I know that we will follow up about funding, and we can talk to Becky about that when we, I think, come to the item on knife crime, for example. Liz.
We did say at the end of the minutes that there would be an item on community support budget proposals, and it wasn't on the actual agenda. Now we've actually discussed it in great detail, but I just wondered why it wasn't initially on the agenda for us to discuss.
Okay, so as Kerry has said to me, it was scheduled for November, so it's not on, wasn't on this one, but we have had, you know, a sort of like first bite of the cherry on that one. Okay, right. Any other corrections that are needed? If not, is everyone happy to approve the minutes as they are? Okay, I think everybody needs to sort of indicate, even Robin. Okay. So I will sign those probably at the end of the meeting. We now move on to the Bath and North Sea, Somerset, Swindon and Wiltshire Integrated Care Board update, which is such a snappy title.
Thank you very much, Chair. And members, I've just got a handful of updates for you today in my update report, so I'll give you a flavour of those now and then always take questions. So the first one is around blood pressure checks. This is just to let you know that we have a series of free checks as part of our Know Your Numbers campaign. Members will recall this is part of our prevention agenda, and the intention is to help to make it easier for people to take control of their own health and well-being. I think crucially what we're looking to do is actually going out to our population. We've spoken about that quite a bit, haven't we, at this panel? So you've got a flavour in there in the report of where we've been. So Somerset and Dorset Heritage Rail Museum is an example, in Midsummer Norton, the Bath Rugby, and just yesterday Alice Park Music Fest. And there are plans to go to Bath City FC in due course. So just coming to the Alice Park Youth Musical Festival that happened yesterday, with thanks for the invite from Councillor Wright, thank you very much. A number of colleagues from the ICB came along alongside council colleagues as well. So I hear it was a good turnout of health and social care colleagues. In particular, the Children's and Young Persons team and the engagement team from the ICB were there, particularly to gather views from our young people about how they feel around access to services. So I look forward to be able to bring you something in due course on that. But with huge thanks to Councillor Wright, and I look forward to hearing a bit more about that event. The third thing I just wanted to update you on was an awareness campaign that's happening in leisure centres across Baines. So this is about the Know What's Normal for You and Check Yourself Out campaign. So again, part of the ongoing initiative for prevention and helping to find cancers at an earlier stage. So the leisure centres that are taking part in that are Culverhay, Odd Down, Bath Sport and Leisure Centre and Keynsham Leisure Centre. So with huge thanks to them. There's quite a bit in the cover report you'll see around the flu and RSV vaccination campaign that we have ongoing this year. So I'll just pull out some headlines for members. So it's recommended that adults 65 plus and residents of care homes for older adults and those with underlying health conditions 6 months to 64 years have the vaccination for flu and COVID. They are available to have together. The flu vaccinations for children are starting now at the beginning of the school year. And as we know, also vaccines for RSV, which is a common cause of coughs and colds and can be particularly dangerous to older people and young children. Those vaccines are being offered for those aged 75 to 79 and pregnant women at 28 weeks. From the 3rd of October, COVID vaccinations for all other eligible groups will be available. And crucially, people can book from the 23rd of September right up to the 20th of December. And as I said before, we will make sure that vaccines for flu and COVID are available to have together in one visit for those that are happy to do so. All of that is set out in the report. I realise there's a lot of information there. A bit of good news, I just wanted to feed back to the committee. There was the official opening of the Dyson Cancer Centre at the Royal United Hospital Bath. We've spoken about that quite a lot at this committee. We know that that centre has actually been open since April, but it was the official opening that Her Majesty the Queen officially opened on the 3rd of September. I went along, it was a fantastic turnout, it was a fantastic day. Patients, staff, supporters were all there to mark that occasion. As we know, the new centre is seeing around 350 patients a day. It was backed by 40 million in government funding as part of the new hospitals programme, but crucially, and I think probably unseen anywhere else in the country, it was supported by an additional 10 million of the fundraising campaign from our communities, so the RUHX charity. But that included a 4 million donation from the James Dyson Foundation and 1 million from the Medlock Charitable Trust. So it's just a huge demonstration, really, of everything that we've been talking about today around our third sectors, our charities, the supporters that we have in Baines. It really is unprecedented. And when you get that partnership working right, something like the Dyson Centre is just formidable to see, and it was really humbling to be there. Finally, Chair, just in my report, I think we spoke perhaps at the last committee, I want to say, around the complaints and indeed compliments procedures. So we've set it out for you in some detail, but for me to summarise, as we touched on last time, where patients have a complaint, whilst we are really committed to responding to those and encouraging a culture that seeks people's experience of care improving, we do want people to speak out. And so the Patient Advice and Liaison Service and Complaint Service offers advice and information for any patient that has concerns or complaints. And I've put in the report the details of the link. I think it was also in your minutes last time. I've also put there just the link to the policy that we have and the process, so you get an understanding of what that process would look like. For people wishing to make a complaint or raise a concern about the care that they've received from a GP practice, dental surgery, optician or pharmacy, they must contact the South West Regional Complaints Team or the healthcare provider directly. Again, we touched on that in the last meeting. And I've given you the contact details for the South West Regional Complaints Team there. And then finally, for those wishing to make a complaint around the RUH, there is an RUH PALS office that's next to the main entrance. And again, the links are all there in the report. So whilst we would do our best to resolve any complaints, of course, if members of the public feel that they're not satisfied in how things might have been handled, and if they wish to take it further, they can contact something called the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. They make final decisions on any unresolved complaints on the NHS in England, and again, the details are set out in the report. Final thing to just finish on this item, Chair. Patients can get help and support from an advocacy service. And again, we've set that out. It's an independent charity. They represent the interest of patients for free. It's independent, it's confidential. And so we've set those details out as well in the report, and of course can attach all of that through the minutes. So that would just the updates that I had today for you, Chair, but as always very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to use some of my chair's privilege just to ask you a question which is about the role of this scrutiny panel in looking at scrutineers, being scrutineers of health services. I think it would be helpful to kind of lay out exactly what the role of this panel is, because I know that this has changed quite recently. Is that something you can answer now, Laura, or is that something you prefer to come back to?
I can give an indication now, and clearly if Suzanne or Councillor Bourne want to add to, then that's fine. But from our perspective, our understanding is that this is a health and social care overview scrutiny panel, and what that means is that you are able to scrutinise those services that we are jointly commissioning and the way in which we are jointly working together. So what I bring to you is a report each month of things that I think should be in the public interest and indeed of interest to yourselves. Some of those are awareness raising and making sure that we set out what the progress is, and sometimes we have reports that are perhaps more detailed, either because you've asked for them or because we think we're at a stage where you need to know something along a particular process. So we can set that out in a bit more detail around the specific policies of this committee and I guess your terms of reference, if that would be helpful. But I guess that's a summary from my perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the point of my question was because you were talking about complaints and, you know, where people go with those complaints. And I understand that part of our role is if there is a large body of complaints, as an example, that then we are tasked with getting to the, you know, delving into the issue to. So I think it'd be useful just to properly understand that. I don't know whether or not Suzanne wanted to add anything before you speak, Laura.
I totally agree with what Laura says. My understanding is that the work that the NHS does is for scrutiny around process and about outcomes, and there are certain things that we will be discussing over the next couple of months which will come in here to review the process and the decisions that were made. I think for adult social care it's different because it's actually Alison that's scrutinised rather than officers, but I support Alison in the information that I have. So it's a little bit different. Obviously, if we were making big decisions, you would need to scrutinise those decisions and how we've got to make those decisions and influence that change. That's how I understand it.
Thank you.
I'm sure Kerry would probably say it much more eloquently than me.
Anything to add, Kerry?
I think it's all captured in our constitution, which I won't recite today because.
Oh, thank you.
I'll see about for later.
Okay, that's a treat for next time. Okay, so panel, Robin and then Joanna.
Thank you. Just a specific question about the vaccination programme. I think that the prevention rather than cure is obviously, it should be direction of travel. I'm just curious, with the qualification criteria for COVID and flu, the age bands, but there are also vulnerable groups within those. But if you look at RSV, and I think it's interesting, this RSV and pneumonia isn't included in the vaccination programme. Those appear to be vaccinations that are based on age bands plus pregnant women, pregnant women, but there doesn't appear to be a vulnerable groups element within that vaccination. So I was curious to know about qualification criteria and but also Lyme pneumonia isn't being included. More generally, and it's following on from Dina's point, it's really interesting to hear what's happening. It's really good to get updating and awareness of issues. I personally, as within Scrutiny, would also like to hear where you think the pressures and problems are, particularly heading into winter with budget and with staffing. And in a sense, the element is which bits of this work are keeping you awake at night? Because to actually hear that would be is probably more useful for Scrutiny. And as far as the constitution goes, we're actually reviewing it at the moment. So if we need to change it, we can change it.
Did you want to respond?
Yeah, a couple of points. So I'll take the question away, if I may, about RSV and pneumonia and just understand why we haven't broken that down into any groups. And indeed, we may have. So let me take that away and come back with full clarity, and we'll put that in a minute. In terms of where are the pressures, we have done a winter pressures update to the Health and Wellbeing Board. I think you were there, Councillor, which was very detailed. It might be sensible that we think of something maybe more in summary that we bring to this committee, if this committee would find that helpful. I think it would be very helpful. It does set out the joint working that we're doing, how we're making sure that we're targeting some of the interventions that we're looking at and some of the services that we commission to address those headline issues. So predominantly things like flow in and out of our hospitals, thinking about the respiratory hubs, which links to some of the things that I've been talking about today, and indeed how we're working in partnership, particularly with our third sector, around the Home is Best programme. So if that would be helpful, I'm very happy to bring that perhaps to the next committee or whenever you have a suitable slot on the agenda.
Thank you, Laura. I think that would be appreciated. I'm sure Robin will turn up especially for that one. Thank you. So who was next on my list? Joanna and then David.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the team turning up yesterday at Alice Park. It was really good to actually meet people and have conversations, as we've heard earlier today. You know, building relationships with people and meeting them in the flesh is great. And yes, they did take my blood pressure, and I'm good, so that's the main thing. I know, it was a rare day. I wasn't angry. Thinking that through, I mean, the issue that Robin has brought up about how we hear from you about the pressures that are on you is useful. Unfortunately, I again was in A&E for a member of my family, and it was interesting. He was very well served, and I'm very happy with what happened. But as we were leaving in August, 17 ambulances arrived. They shut down A&E and they asked everybody to go home because they couldn't cope with the pressures that were on them. And this was on an August day. So we really are facing unprecedented times in terms of the services that are on offer within the NHS, and how we best work that through is really important. So to have that information given to us, and then when we then speak to our communities, that is a useful thing, because it's a two-way experience, and it was very powerful to watch. In terms of yesterday, again, useful conversations. We found out yesterday that methadone users in Lambridge are attending Boots in Southgate because the Lambridge pharmacy can't hold enough methadone. And the reason that this is problematic is a lot of those users find access to the city centre problematic. So again, I just wonder how we address that kind of problem. And it was interesting that that came out of a community event, hence why community events and conversations are so important. So I bring that as an issue to you directly that came out of yesterday. And again, I will always raise the issue of dentists. Where are we with dentists? What's happening on that front? And there are big issues around that. Thank you. And again, thank you for your hard work.
Just a few small questions for you then, Laura.
Yeah, and I think Just echo, really, absolutely. The whole point of us going out is because we want to hear from communities, and you're right, that's where the richness of information is and how we know what it is that we need to address. So 100% with you on that one. I would be grateful if you could just let me know a little bit more detail that you heard about that issue between the Lambridge and the Southgate pharmacy and the methadone issue. And of course, I can make sure that gets to the right colleagues in the ICB to see if there's anything that we can do to support or help there. In terms of the headline pressures, I think what I'm hearing is it would be helpful and maybe we need to work out the mechanism. So, for example, I think we've said before when health and wellbeing reports go, we could make sure that they're available for scrutiny members. And I can give that some thought because obviously we produce different highlight reports all the time, and then that might generate the types of things that you might want to ask questions on. And indeed in the agenda setting, perhaps I can offer more there. So yeah, and then in terms of dentists, I don't have an update for you today, Councillor Wright, but as you know, it's the dental bans that we're focusing on at the moment, making sure that we get that right so we can continue to input into that.
With dentistry, is that possible that we could have more of an update in our next meeting? Because obviously that focuses on children's services, where, you know, obviously dentistry is particularly pertinent.
Yeah, we have had quite a few updates on dentistry recently, haven't we? So I will ask colleagues to see if there's anything further they can give us at this time. And if not, when might be a suitable time for them to provide an update. But yes, absolutely, we'll take that away.
Thank you, Laura. So, yes, Becky, you...
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come in on just a couple of things in relation to your point about Lambridge and Boots. If you could direct that to me, that would be really helpful because we commission drugs and alcohol services, and I can pick that up with a larger piece of work and conversation that we've been having with Councillor Bourne around pharmacies and our commissioned drugs and alcohol services. And then in relation to the question from yourself, Councillor Moss, around vaccination, there's a it might just help in terms of answering that question, Laura. So there is a national committee called the National Committee for Vaccination and Immunisations that is responsible for doing research to identify the effectiveness and how cost-effective different vaccination programmes are for different population groups. So that committee will have done some research to identify who are the most vulnerable populations from, for example, RSV, and then there are then requirements set out for all NHS commissioning organisations who lead on vaccination to deliver those vaccinations. So it isn't a local decision made, it's a national decision then that's passed down, and we can pass the link to you, if that would be helpful, around the vulnerability of particular populations, which has led to those two populations being identified.
If you could just follow up on that, that's really useful. Thank you very much, and that I think would be useful. So are those national criteria absolute on us to deliver those vaccinations, or can we add to that, or is it just these are the groups, this is how you deliver the service? And I suppose I'm just curious with RSV, why vulnerable groups such as people with a history of respiratory illness, asthma, whatever, don't appear to be included, but that's just an observation.
We'll send a link through that will hopefully provide a little bit more information. For vaccination requirements that come through the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisations, yes, we have to deliver those. How we deliver those in terms of developing outreach, if it's appropriate, there can be an element of local determination, as we've seen with flu and as we've seen with COVID. But often there are quite clear recommendations around who needs to deliver and in what form. Thank you.
So just following up from that, does that mean that perhaps vulnerable groups such as our homeless population or those that are, gypsy traveller and voters, so they could be included even though they're not specified in terms of their aid or another vulnerability?
We need to follow what's called in the Green Book, so we need to follow the national requirements. So we've got clear guidance nationally around pregnant women and older people, and so it's those populations that we'll be following. And we're based on evidence and research about who is most vulnerable.
I'm then surprised that the groups I've just mentioned are not considered vulnerable, but I guess that's more of a comment than... I shall move on. So next I have David.
Thanks, Chair. question for Laura, please. Thank you for highlighting the engagement activities that you've done around blood pressure checking in Midsummer Norton and Bath, and the cancer awareness in Keynsham and Bath. I was wondering what engagement or plans for engagement you have within the rural communities, given the difficulties with access.
Yeah, so I think, again, it would be useful to bring a report back to this committee. We have just established, or re-established, an engagement team in the Integrated Care Board following our organisational development. And one of the things that we want to be able to do with that engagement team is to highlight where we think there may be themes or issues or groups of people that we need to reach out to. So I think in the past we've often heard of hard to reach groups, and as we all know, they're not hard to reach, we're just not trying hard enough or being in the right spaces. So I'd welcome your input to that, Councillor, and I think we also have a panel, a Your Health, Your Voice panel, a public engagement panel in Baines. We'll be seeking their views as well. So we will have something that we need to come back out with, and I'll be mindful when we are coming out with updates to you that I'm really clear on where is the offer for our rural communities as well. But thank you, that's a really helpful challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'd be very happy if you did reach out for any input for the rural communities.
Thank you, David. Any other questions from the panel? Otherwise, I'm going to bring Liz in. Sorry, that sounds more threatening than I meant to. Liz.
Amber, this is probably, Laura, this is probably something that ought to be brought to our panel, so I'm going to raise it now. There's currently a single-member report requesting delegated authority to be given to the Director of Adult Social Care to passport £35 million over 7 years to your organisation, the Integrated Care Board. And I understand this contract is going to be awarded by the Integrated Care Board in a couple of weeks. So can you clarify if there are any services currently available to Baines residents which are not part of the new core contract? And in fact, there are 3 aspects of the contract. One is core services that have to be delivered. One are reserve services, and services which could be introduced after the contract award. But there's also an excluded service list. And can you confirm that to us whether there are any community health services on the reserve list or excluded list that are currently provided by Baines, currently provided to Baines residents? So it's looking at this new contract. It's a lot of money. It's something that really should have been brought to this meeting. So I wonder, are you able to comment on it, or do we need to go to Suzanne, or do we need to come back, soon to find out exactly what's going on?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Harden, for that question. So the procurement that you're referring to is the Integrated Community-Based Care Programme. We are actually in a live procurement at this moment in time, so I'm not able to talk about that at this moment in time. What I can do, however, is clarify that there will be an opportunity where we will be updating all of the relevant boards and committees. So you will have an update in due course, in particular around process. I think the questions that you've got are very specific. I would be minded that when we come back to give a full update, we will cover as much of that as we possibly can. But at the moment, because we're in that live procurement, I'm afraid I'm not able to say any more other than to confirm that, yes, I think as we have reported before, we are looking to re-procure community services across adults and children and young people. And it is an integrated community-based care programme, and we will provide an update in due course.
I could challenge you on that. I know it's clearly, as it's commissioning, and it will be, we're looking at the outcome of the commissioning, it's clearly confidential. But surely the requirements specification is something we have invited the market to respond to. So some of these are in the public domain. So therefore, is it not possible that you can give some comment on this?
So the procurement, we have invited people to apply for that procurement. So at this moment in time, it would be available to them, but it is not something that we consider to be in the public domain. That is information that we have provided in order that they can respond to our commissioning requirements. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be deliberately obstructive and not give an answer. I guess what I'm saying is, in the broadest sense, we are recommissioning community-based services, integrated community-based services for children and adults, and that we will be able to give an update in due course.
We look forward to an update on the outcomes in due course. And one very last thing to mention is just your report and the Cabinet members' report always come to us fairly late in the day. As you know, with this committee, we have a huge amount of reading to do. Would it be possible for them to come with the papers, which Mark sends to us about a week in advance? That would be really helpful. Thank you.
We can certainly look at timelines. I think because it's an update report, the deadlines are slightly different, because I think trying to manage and get the formal papers through takes precedent, which I understand. But if it would be helpful for members to have it all at the same time and slightly earlier, then absolutely. Let me liaise with Mark and see if we can get those dates in the diary, and I'll plug them into colleagues providing the information.
Actually, just having it as part of the pack, I think, would be really helpful, because then you're not having to then think, where is that email? Yeah, so in that sort of practical sense of managing it, I think that would be really, really helpful. Now, I wanted to ask something which has gone entirely out of my head after Liz was speaking. Perhaps it will come back to me. Anyway, I think we will now move on, unless there's any other questions on the ICB update. Okay, so we now move on to the public health update, and thank you, Becky, for the report. Alison, did you want to introduce this?
Yes, I didn't include an update on public health in my report because there was this separate report. And this is some areas from public health that have been requested by this panel for a bit more of a deep dive into and the three are the work that we're doing on health improvement, and that's a whole systems approach to health improvement that we're doing in Bath and North East Somerset. Also on social prescribing, and lastly on sexual and reproductive health. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to go through the detail, but those are the three areas that you requested the report on.
So, Becky.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to hand straight over to Annette and Amy, who are the lead. So Annette is going to start. She's the lead for the health improvement, the Be Wellbeings, and then Amy is leading on social prescribing, sexual health. So I'll hand over to you, Annette. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So, as I introduce myself, I'm Annette Luke. I'm a consultant in public health, based in the public health team. So, Be Wellbeings is a new programme of work which we've been working on with system partners to develop over the last year. We've got to the point now where we have a framework document which has been developed with multiple different partners through a series of one-to-one interviews, network events, steering group meetings, working group meetings and a writing group. So we've had wide engagement for a wide variety of partners across healthcare providers, educational settings, leisure providers, council departments and community organisations. And our voluntary and community sector organisations have been a really critical part of that. I would say that the two network events that we had were incredibly well attended. We had one in Bath City Football Club and we had one in the Pavilion. One was in December of last year and one was earlier this year, which really enabled a wide variety of partners to come together and to really think about how we do health improvement better across Baines. And the idea of this framework is that we really start to grapple with some of the really complex issues around healthy weight, around physical inactivity, around emotional well-being, around how we prevent and enable people to be protected from the harms of tobacco and alcohol. And this is really trying to recognise that some of the drivers of those health improvement issues are interconnected and complicated. And we need to be working across our different sectors, across our different organisations, and at very different levels of the system to really try and make change. So this has been quite a long piece of development where we've worked with the system to understand what whole system working is. It's been a process by which we've listened to people across the system to try and understand what their priorities are. We've tried to understand what work is already going on, and actually Baines does very well in the way that it does work across different sectors and across different organisations, but we recognise that there's more to do. And we've pulled that together into a narrative which was taken to the Health and Wellbeing Board earlier this year and is about to be published. The next step for that work is that we're looking to develop 2 network groups and an operational delivery group. The network groups that the collection of partners have agreed is that one will work with a specific community in the first instance, really trying to understand in a proper co-development approach how we change things for a particular community. We'll have a second network group which is really trying to understand and work on the needs of children and young people, recognising there's a lot of work already for children and young people in that space and trying to understand where the space and the gaps are that we can add value as a collection of partners. And the third one is looking really at how we work as a whole system across a universal offer. So that's recognising that not everybody in Bath and North East Somerset falls into a sort of a community with a particular need or is a child and young people, but actually health improvement is important to all of us. And that group will work on elements of work such as things like a tobacco action plan, a specific focus on tobacco to continue from what we already do. It might look at how we work collectively as a group of organisations around a compassionate approach to weight. It will grapple with those sort of big topics that don't fit one or other of the network groups. This work will be overseen by a steering group, and again, that steering group is just being reformed. The steering group that we used for development of the process became quite large because actually many people were interested in this and we were very grateful for that wide variety of inputs. But we now need a steering group that's going to take us through the next steps of this and be with us on that journey and own this journey for the next 10 years. This is a long-term approach that will enable us to really try and get to the bottom and work on the causes of the causes across our population. The next steps for us then are we have our framework around which we're going to work, and we're trying to build those networks and then develop action plans within those networks. We recognise this is quite a new way of working, and this is going to have to be iterative. When we work in a whole systems way, what we often do is we try and do something, and it will have an impact that we can't necessarily foresee somewhere else in the system. And so the idea is that we work as networks and as a steering group to really say what we're doing here as our priority, how is that going, how do we move on from that, how do we recognise where that may be having unintended or intended consequences that are beneficial or not. So it really is an iterative approach that we're going to be learning from as we go. It's a very exciting initiative. The whole systems approach to obesity was a concept that was developed by Public Health England, and it's been used particularly around obesity in many, many other local authorities. We've been working with the University of Bath in our development of this approach, where they've supported us, particularly with the first workshop, and brought in some of their expertise around facilitating that workshop discussion. And we're very optimistic about this being a step change in the way that we address health improvement while continuing to provide some of the individual-based services that are still required to support individuals on their health improvement journeys. I'll pause there.
Okay, is that pause for questions or pause because someone's going to take over?
Is there anything else you'd like to say at this point, Becky?
No, I think that's wonderful, and we absolutely do look forward and really appreciate any comments, thoughts, questions you have. I guess, Chair, would you like us to go through the whole report first, or to take questions after each of the 3 sections?
I think if we maybe give you the questions as we're here, as we stopped for the moment. Paul.
Thank you very much. A very interesting report. However, if we're doing a programme of work, when I look at your report, I can't see where you'll challenge yourself and what does success look like. And also not just that you do an intervention with someone and they start, you have a dose here of 33 minutes of extra walking a day, but how is that successful? Supposing that dose stops after 3 months, then it's not a success at all, it's just a temporary intervention. So where are you creating the information that shows you that all this work delivers short-term benefit, but also how are you going to monitor the long-term benefits, particularly as within this, I can't find any targets about what you're aiming for. So where are the targets?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Councillor. So, this is a different way of working, and we have targets around our individual-based interventions. When we're supporting an individual, say for example around our wellness service, we know what we're trying to achieve with an individual in terms of supporting them on their health improvement journey. This is a different approach that is really trying to go recognise the importance of those individual approaches, but it's doing something different. What it's trying to do is to say some of the reasons why people might smoke, or some of the reasons why people might be physically inactive, or some of the reasons why people might use alcohol to levels that aren't healthy for them, they're shared. So some of those may be around access to facilities to enable them to be physically inactive. It may be that people don't have a background or the support to be able to access those. It may be that people have poor access to transport that means that they can't get to where they want to be to do a health improvement intervention that they want to do. What we're trying to do through this piece of work is not say we're trying to make this person individually on its own achieve this outcome. A lot of this work is aiming to try and work, for example, in the network group around communities to talk to a community and to say, what does health improvement look like for you? We really want to do that listening piece that we've already been talking about with communities to say, what are the barriers to you in being more physically active? What could we do as a collection of partners to really support that community to be more active, to choose different foods, to have access to foods in a different way? And those discussions with a community haven't started yet. Community partners have been around the table helping us shape the framework under which we're going to do that work. But the work by which we identify those community priorities to enable us to really make those more upstream changes for health improvement, which we know are needed to create that population level change around obesity levels, around physical inactivity levels, are quite different. So you're absolutely right, at the moment in this you cannot see we are going to achieve this by then. What we do know is we need to be working on these issues, and as we develop our action plans, there will be an iterative approach to trying to support a community or a group of people to achieve better health improvement outcomes, starting from where they are. So it is quite a different approach. It's something that we'll be working with our steering group to understand how we best monitor that. And in many ways, some of the monitoring will be around engagement as well as performance. If we want to be changing physical activity or obesity levels within our population, this isn't a short-term fix, which is why this framework is set to run for 10 years. These aren't things that we can do immediately. So we're recognising that this monitoring and evaluation of our progress is going to be iterative and it's going to be continuous.
That's all very fine, but I mean, for instance, you say in your objectives to support modal shift of active travel, providing people with travel choices, but where are you explaining what these travel choices are? Do you understand how infrastructure influences? So are you doing a piece of work to see where there is a deficit of infrastructure? So, for instance, in my area, the swimming pool was closed down at Culverhay and hasn't been reopened. So in one of the lowest income areas of our area, we've taken away a whole sporting facility. So does your infrastructure challenge look at where the deficits are and think about how we can improve those deficits?
Our ambition for this work is to work with all the different partners who would be involved in understanding what a community needs or is expressing as a need, and to understand how we can work together with a community to try and support better lifestyles. Now, we can't promise to do in-depth work with lots of communities from the get-go. This is a new way of working. So we want to work in one area, and we will ask an area whether they would like to work with us in this way as a way to understand how we do this better. But I would imagine if that, in that area, we would have a range of partners sitting around the table, people who live in that area, who understand that area, who are already working in the voluntary community sector in that area, to tell us what the needs and issues are. And then what we bring as a collection of other partners is that we sit together and try and understand that and work out the solutions. So we haven't approached a specific community yet. We've done some work thinking about where that community might best be in terms of some of the needs and in terms of some of the assets that are already available, where we might be able to work in a helpful way as a starting point. But those conversations still need to happen.
First of all, I'd like to say I think it's a great programme and a great idea. I'm just sort of challenging you on a few things, that's all. So if we then, you say you're not looking at individual areas, but in childhood obesity, you've specifically mentioned the Baines average and 3 areas. So are those kind of 3 areas where you're going to work with families to reduce obesity and the causes of obesity? And the causes of obesity are not necessarily always directly low income. It could be bad choices in the food they buy and cook and prepare on that low income, and a similar family on the same income making good choices won't have that obesity. So are you looking at how that, I mean, I can give you one specific example. In my area, the chip shop gives a really big bag of chips for £1 to children that he knows aren't eating. So they go away and eat more chips. So how are you addressing in those Peasdown, Radstock and Midsummer Norton areas? Again, I come back to targets. How will you evaluate success? Because obviously you would want to get those 3 areas down to at least the average of Baines. And hopefully the Baines average will be coming down, so it's a further challenge for you. So are you working with those families about cooking, for instance, and food shopping and ways to have a cheap food on a low income but good food?
So it would be helpful for me just to clarify, when you talk about those 3 areas, where that has come from, because we haven't specified specifically which areas.
It says it in pilot area, Summer Valley, childhood obesity, 27.8 of year 6, or am I reading the wrong report?
They are related.
Ah, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you'd finished your presentation.
No, that's absolutely fine. And actually, your other points, I'll come back on those because they're incredibly important. So your chip shop example is a really good example of actually how I see this working really well, and how actually individual intervention-based services won't address that problem of chip portion sizes in an area. But if a community identifies, and if people working in that local area identify that that's an issue, then how do we come, this is, I hope, the framework by which we come together and say, this is a problem in our area. How are we collectively, as a group of organisations, individuals, community members, active officers, how are we going to come together to solve that? And that's how I would really see this framework adding value to where we are already. So I think it's actually a really great example of how I would see this being different.
Thank you.
I'm sure, Paul, our chip shop will serve you less chips in future. Paul, can you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. So I've got Alison and then David, and then I'll bring in the others after that.
Make the point about Councillor Crossley talking about the social prescribing element rather than the health improvement element, so I've made that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. In that case, then, I will move on to David.
Thank you, that was really interesting. I'd like to know more about how you decide who you're going to choose as a geographical community. How you're going to reach out to them, who you're going to reach out to decide what may be the geographical community of choice for your first
Oh, thanks. Yes, so the process that we've gone through so far is that we have looked at the data as much as we can. It's very difficult, obviously, to get small area data for some of the health improvement measures we would like to see. So what we've done is we've tried to look as much as we can to really get a picture of where the greatest health improvement need is. But then we've also worked with our steering group, which comprises people, as I said, across lots of different sectors, to really understand what we already know about the assets in those different communities, because we recognise that needs are one thing, but the assets on which we can build and the networks on which we can build are also incredibly important for this kind of work. So we've gone through that process. We're now looking at how we best approach that community, and obviously the councillors in areas are a very important part of that. So we recognise that, and that will be the next step for us in terms of approaching a community from those that we've looked at and identified as being the highest priority areas.
Where does all this information sit, your reports to the steering committee? Are they available to us to have a look at?
Yeah, so we've reported the framework and the development of the framework to the Integrated Care Alliance and to the Health and Wellbeing Board. The steering group meetings haven't been made public record to date. I'm not sure that was the intention, but you know, if that's something that becomes required, we can consider that. Yeah, so at the moment that isn't available to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Joanna, and then Kevin, and then Onkar.
Thank you. I've got a master's in social anthropology, and it essentially sounds like you're sort of approaching it as a culture-based improvement to health, and that you're looking at groups which are culturally of this type, and how to create intervention into that. So I wonder if there's any sort of anthropological research that you've used, because there's a wide body of literature out there that sits in health and well-being. Have you gone to any other examples where this iterative approach has been used and been successful? Where has that been, and why have they been successful? In terms of culture and reaching out in terms of your assets and networks, we clearly know that austerity over however many years different political groups want to shout about it, the landscape looks very different to when I was a young person to young people today, and how we reach them and how we get to those networks. And then the main issue is the trust. Certainly I know from lots of experience that people don't trust people that look like you and me for all kinds of reasons, and therefore how do we build those trust networks in place to actually work with groups of people so they are successful and they are also co-producing that piece of work to take it forward. So things aren't done to them, that they are part of that conversation moving forward.
Sorry. So I'll just try and pick up those different points. So first of all, in terms of trust, I think that's really important, and I think you're absolutely right. The people who know the communities best are the people in those communities or working very closely with those communities, and me coming in as an officer who doesn't live or work there is not necessarily the best. I'm not necessarily the best person to be getting that information and collating and reflecting on that information. So I think that's one of the reasons why we really want to understand the assets that already exist there, and that's the same for working with the children and young people's perspective as well. It's saying there are lots of people who are already working on children and young people. How do we build on what already exists? So I think you're absolutely right around trust. It's about understanding where we are well placed to coordinate and provide expertise, but where others are much better to understand the communities themselves, and how we have to be respectful and humble about that. In terms of research and where this is working, so the process that we followed is this PHE approach to the whole systems approach to obesity. As I say, we've extended it to health improvement because we felt it was appropriate to do so. That was based on research done by Leeds Beckett University back in, I think, 2015. Lots of other local authorities are using that approach. Swindon, for example, has a whole systems approach to obesity. I think it's Dartmouth that has a sort of much wider sort of health improvement whole systems approach going on there, and so we've looked at that. So we have looked at different areas and how they've done this, and how we can sort of learn the best lessons from that. But this isn't a perfect science. This is, as we've talked about, it's not something where I can say, if we do this, this will work. But we do know that we need to be doing something differently. Did I answer all your questions? Sorry.
It's not just that they are questions. I guess what I'm trying to do is say there are other ways of thinking about this, and there is a whole group of people who have spent a lot of time doing that, and therefore, how do you make sure that you reach out to that body of work and make sure that you bring some of that in, whilst at the same time working a very tightrope of reaching communities that are hard to reach. There's a fantastic quote that says the family is the first criminal unit. So, essentially what I'm trying to say is, how do you therefore reach that family to prevent that crime? I'm using that as a wider example, but I think that is essentially what we're coming to, is that it's about culture, and therefore how do we reach those cultural groups?
So I assume those nods were just acknowledging. Okay, good. Right. So on my list I have Kevin and then Olga.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. When the health improvement project was discussed quite a few panels ago, I think it was brought to us. It was in discussion with, as far as the educational setting bit was concerned, to find out other ways that, or other factors that impact on children's attainment within school, as opposed to what schools can do, and then what factors are outside of schools' control, and how we can best then maybe support those people to do better within school. In very layman's terms, because I haven't got a master's in anthropology or anything else, can you sort of kind of say how this educational setting fact-finding mission is going to go, and what its intended sort of pathway is, and how all this fits together with that simple bit, this is what schools can do, but actually community needs to do this, or we as a society needs to do this, because schools can't do that.
If that's okay, Councillor, and then I'll hand over to my colleague if that's all right, because there are two interlinking pieces of work happening here. So one is around this health improvement framework, but there's also a piece of work going on around educational attainment. And the two obviously are linked in that educational attainment is linked to future health outcomes and is linked to your ability to have positive health improvement outcomes later. But also, obviously, if you're well and healthy, that impacts on your ability to learn. So the two pieces of work are separate, but clearly interlinked. And the way that we go forward and work with communities needs to be cognizant of both. But perhaps I'll hand over to Amy.
Yeah, that's fine. So the educational attainment piece, that's looking at the inequality in educational attainment between those children and young people from disadvantaged families and those that aren't. That piece of work is aligned with and sitting alongside the piece of work that education colleagues are doing with schools and with St John's Foundation around big education. But they do link, and we are in touch, and I have been on the steering group for the health improvement work as well. So there is crossover in people that are contributing to all of these different pieces of work. The educational attainment piece, I think we're due to come back to scrutiny at some point about that. I know that I gave an update, a couple of months ago with Chris. That piece of work is progressing, so it's not finished. What we've done essentially to begin with is we've done a scoping piece of work where we've looked at the evidence base, we've spoken to other local authorities that are very close to us demographically, that look similar, but where their educational attainment may be smaller. We've done a big qualitative piece, so we've interviewed over 40 different professionals, young people. We're still wanting to speak to a few more, including parents and carers. What that is then informing, which we're already having conversations about, is that whole system approach. How do we address these needs and gaps that are coming through that triangulation of evidence across the council and by our key partners across the system? And we have a multi-partner task and finish group that's informing that piece of work. So it's not a public health piece of work, but we are leading that work, but it's very much a partnership piece of work. And we're having conversations with heads of service at the moment across the council about what they can specifically do to address those needs. And then some of those, we need to have smart actions that will be embedded in an action plan. And then we're likely to have a kind of list, if you like, but it will be kind of better annotated than a list of principles and priorities that we would like to do if there was funding, because some of these things can be achieved within existing funding and others may not be achievable. So yeah, that's kind of a very quick update on that piece of work.
So it's linked to this health and wellbeing framework in general, but it's a separate piece at the moment. So you're not trying to fit it into this particular framework?
It's not one of the key projects that's being picked up under this particular programme or project piece of work. However, it is taking a whole systems approach, so it is informed by the approach that is stated in the framework.
And I think some of the confusion might be because there is so one of our key network groups is looking at children and young people.
Yeah.
So that is, in terms of exactly what that children and young people's network group will focus on, that needs to be determined by the network group that forms around the children and young people's system partners. Now, that sounds it's a little bit like the community. It's about saying, when we take stock, where is the best place to put our efforts to build on what already exists in the children and young people's place to change the health improvement environment for children in Baines. Now, that isn't finalised yet. We've started to have discussions around that with the existing groups that happen in the children and young people's space, but we don't know exactly what their focus of activity will be. But clearly, educational attainment is a piece of work that's already ongoing, and that they will feed each other. They will talk and link to each other. But you're right, what you can't see in this paper at the moment is a specific, we will be doing this for children and young people. The ambition, however, is recognising that health improvement is incredibly important for children and young people for lots of different reasons, and that it sets young people up for the rest of their lives in terms of their health improvement outlook. But also that we know there are lots of challenges for children and young people at the moment as well. So we're recognising that that's a priority area for us, but exactly what will be done in that space we haven't determined yet, but the network group that surrounds that will do that.
It was just that in the paragraph 3.8, it was saying that this network group was focusing on a children and young people's setting.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, I thought then you were thinking about school as such, but...
So we haven't assumed that it will definitely be schools, because we know that there are lots of there's lots of already activity in schools. We're not saying it won't be schools. We're talking to the people who work with schools to understand what their ambition might be. It could also be with early years settings. It could also be with universities. There are multiple different settings that engage with children and young people, and we're open. We're not assuming that schools will want to work with us in that way. So a bit like the communities, we're not making assumptions about that. We're having discussions to say we recognise this is really important to children and young people. Is this something where this framework can add value in the way that we work with the children and young people's setting? And we'll work with you on that, wherever that setting might be. The reason that we chose, or the steering group came to the conclusion that we should be working in a community and in a setting, is because this is such a huge ambition. And if we start talking about all of the different things we've discussed, it becomes very difficult to continue to engage people. We have to make it tangible. And I think children and young people do come together in settings they are, and a community is a tangible place where people can start to see change. So we're recognising the complexity of this whole system approach to health improvement. It's a huge agenda, and we're trying to break it down to things that are meaningful for people and build on what we're already doing.
Perhaps we can ask our Cabinet Member for Children's Services to include an update on this in his report for our next meeting. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. So I'm now going to move on to ONCAR, and I think, Liz, you want to speak to.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I got a few questions in terms of data, objective, and the future sustainability. So just to start with, what are the key health metrics being tracked to correlate active travel with health improvements?
Okay, on active travel, so active travel was given as an example. It may be that it's a good example because actually it shows the multiple different departments and the multiple different people that would need to come together if we wanted to prioritise and make change around active travel. In terms of active travel, I think Amy's going to pick up on some examples of how, for example, the Active Way works on active travel. But we haven't set any particular targets specifically around, and there are other departments who are also working on active travel within the council. So we haven't specifically set that as a target for this work, but we recognise that active travel is one way that looks at physical inactivity, it looks at how communities engage with their environment, it looks at the impact that it can have on weight and on healthy levels of weight. So it's a good example, but we haven't set a specific target about active travel within the context of this framework, although there is other work going on around active travel.
Thank you. And how will the program be adjusted if new or changing needs are identified during the pilot period? And are there a long-term plan to sustain behavioural changes after the pilot's end?
Okay, so I guess there's, so we don't see this as a pilot per se. This is a framework that we want to see over a 10-year period, but there may be, so when we work with a community, to a certain degree, that will be acting as our sort of first understanding of how we do this. In terms of how we then monitor success or otherwise from that, as I've mentioned, there'll be, what I would envisage from that is we will have an action plan for each network, where the network itself, and this is not, we are leading it in public health, but we are not the owners of these plans or this framework. It is genuinely a system partnership around how we deliver this. So there will be things that we would need to monitor around the action plan, around what the network sets for itself as priorities. And we've identified some initial priorities which they may or may not take on board. But there will also be engagement. So are we getting the groups together that we need to be part of this? We can monitor ourselves in terms of our success of maintaining those networks and those groups in terms of how we're trying to deliver this programme. So again, a bit like one of the previous questions, what we would hope to see over the next 10 years is improvement in some of the big metrics around smoking levels, around physical inactivity levels, around rates of overweight or obesity. But we can't monitor those on a year-by-year basis because they're incredibly challenging things to change. But obviously, over the longer term, that's what we're aiming to improve.
Thank you. And lastly, in terms of data, what were the primary sources of data for deprivation, physical inactivity, obesity? Were they national surveys, local health data, or another sources? And how recent is the data? And how frequently is it updated?
So there's a lot in that. We have lots of different sources of data that we use in public health. So some of it is nationally published, for example, through fingertips. So, for example, rates of overweight or obesity in adult populations or in children and young people would be published on national statistics, and we can break that down to Bath and North East Somerset levels. We also can use information from some of our locally based surveys, so for example around food insecurity and the voice box survey about how we understand. So what we do all the time is we're trying to look at all the different sources that are available to us, understand what that tells us about the picture at sort of Baines level, and where we can, much lower level, to really understand how things are changing. And we will continue to try and use those to monitor. We try not to introduce lots of new measures if we don't have to, because obviously there's always an associated cost. I don't mean necessarily monetary cost about introducing new measures at a local level. We try to use what we have before we do that. There's also resource costs associated with that. So we're always looking to understand how we better understand our communities within the data that we have, and to also ensure that we're using qualitative data as well. So making sure that we're listening, we're understanding, we're talking to people in terms of whether we're doing and how we're achieving what we're setting out to achieve.
Thank you. Liz?
I'd like to go into finance a little bit more, and Ankur has mentioned finance, but you mentioned that over 10 years. Now, some of your projects are, especially to do with social prescribing, you mention are short-term and have short-term funding. So under 2.2 and 3.15 in your report, you mentioned that these could very well come to an end unless you secure more funding. So I just wondered, how secure is the funding going to be in the future? And can I just say some wonderful things are happening out in my area, outside of Bath. We've got the Soma Valley Rediscovered, which is taking place with lots and lots of activities, which is wonderful because it's green social prescribing. But it would be such a shame that things like that were not supported in the future. So how confident are you that funding will continue, and how are you going to determine which of your projects continue and which don't? Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Councillor. That's linked to the social prescribing section. Do you want me to try and address that now, or do you want me to...
I was thinking you probably should actually sort of try and wrap up some of the social prescribing as well, because I'm aware that we've had a lot of questions,
Yes.
and it was as though you had addressed all the points in your report, but obviously you have done a section. So did you want to pick up your social prescribing now?
Yes.
And then and perhaps address Liz's question within that?
Yeah. So if I run through a short piece on social prescribing and then we'll pause, let me know that at that point whether you want me to pick up questions or continue to sexual health. Social prescribing it was just to make the point really that social prescribing is not led by public health. We're an important partner, but actually it's an approach that all sectors and partners across the Baines system are very invested in and very much believe in and very much want to champion. So although I'm providing this update, others are very involved in this and may wish to comment when questions are asked. So Becky, Kate and I are working very closely, as with health partners, and there is a steering group that is informing this piece of work. As you've already highlighted, we've got some excellent examples of social prescribing taking place across Baines. So Summer Valley we discovered with the green social prescribing. We also have the Active Way, which I'll talk a little bit about. Social prescribing is also very much facilitated by the Community Wellbeing Hub. That is what they do day in and day out. And actually, there's many social prescribing interventions, but they may not be recognised as social prescribing interventions. And part of this work is trying to ensure that there's a broad definition, so all of those interventions know that they are social prescribing and are recognised as so. As a system, we have identified that whilst we do have really good examples of social prescribing, we don't have a consistent shared vision or approach around social prescribing, which is really important. That's really important in ensuring that we're all kind of working to the same vision and approach. We share the same definition, the same priorities and so on. And it was highlighted under one of the Health and Wellbeing Board's 4 strategic priorities. So there's a commitment to developing a strategic approach to social prescribing to enable people to remain healthy and manage their physical and mental health conditions. So in response to that, one of the things that we've done, because we recognise that whilst many different sectors and organisations want to champion social prescribing, we haven't got a lead post in place to do that. So one of the things that we've done is we've invested in a 2-year post, a social prescribing manager post, which has been embedded in 3SG, and they are leading a really important piece of work with us, supported by partners. So they'll be doing a number of things, but key things include scoping what social prescribing looks like in Baines, so what our existing offer is essentially, and with that kind of highlighting what's working well and maybe where our needs and gaps are. We know we have some. Then it's using that scoping exercise to develop a Baines framework and an action plan for social prescribing, and indeed developing a business case to support longer-term funding. So we don't know what that will look like, but we do recognise that many of our good example projects, programmes, are supported by short-term funding. So what we want to do is look at how do we make that more sustainable, and we're trying to learn from other areas around that. So BNSSG, for example, recently attended one of our steering groups to share their approach and how they developed a business case to secure further funding. As I've mentioned, that is informed by that steering group. That's crucial. You did ask for a little bit of information about Active Way. I think it's all in the report, but just to highlight essentially that that programme is working well. It's based in the Summer Valley. That was the geography that we got funding for. We have been stretching that to some further areas of deprivation or need where that's felt that it's appropriate, and talking to our funders who are Active Travel England. That has a team in place that is coordinating that offer and the commissioning of different interventions, mainly provided for our third sector partners. There's a whole range of interventions offered, such as Sustrans provide active walking, Bath Mine provide interventions, so do Key Active, which is, it's all in the report, but essentially that uses technology to support active travel and shift behaviours. That particular project is helpfully being supported by the University of West of England. They're our evaluation partner, because as we know with all of these things, it's really important to collect data and demonstrate where things are working and where they may not be, because this is a pilot programme. It is going well. We are being held up as a best practice example nationally by Active Travel England. We actually have been from the beginning, which is really positive. So kind of huge thanks to the team that's in place leading on that piece of work. And then we know that some interventions are kind of working well. So ones that I've noted in the report include Key Active, inclusive cycling, and the Wilson Grant. And the Wilson Grant is about community asset building as well. I think I'll pause there, unless you want me to talk about sexual health, but you might want me to answer questions now.
Thank you, that's very thorough. Thank you very much, that's fine.
So was there any other questions on this part, the social prescribing part of the public health report? Paul, you put your hand up, was it on social prescribing?
I'm not sure, I just want to ask some questions about recommendation 2.3.
Okay, 2.3, support the ambitions of each programme. Perhaps we'll come to that at the very end. Right, okay. Would you like to go on to sexual health then, please?
Thank you, I will do. So sexual health, sexual and reproductive health, it's obviously a huge area. So you may want me to focus in on particular parts of it when it comes to questions, but just to briefly highlight that from April 2013, local authorities have been responsible for commissioning specialist sexual health and reproductive services, so what we call our GUN, or genitourinary medicine services. So ours in Baines are currently provided by the RUH at the Riverside site in the centre of Bath. Contraception and sexual health services, which are also provided at Riverside, but through other organisations and partners too, and HIV prevention. The offer is often open to all, though services ensure a specific focus on our more vulnerable groups, and that can include young people, men who have sex with men, and those from black and minority ethnic groups, but there are other groups as well. Very briefly, we generally do well in relation to our sexual and reproductive health outcomes.
So new STI diagnoses are lower than England and the South West averages. We do well on things such as LARC, long-acting reversible contraception, so fitting of hormonal and non-hormonal coils, implants, those sorts of things. Our rates are high. The teenage conception rate remains low. So we generally do well. Areas, I think, highlighted in the report that we have a particular focus on at the moment relate, for example, to late HIV diagnosis. So although that's affecting a very small number of people in the population, our rates are essentially need improving. So that's one of the things where we have a number of actions embedded in our action plan. You did ask for an update on commissioning arrangements. I'll try and do this very concisely, but essentially our Riverside Clinic, so that's our mainstream sexual and reproductive health service, the contract is in place and that's agreed until March 2029, with funding agreed until March 26, and there's no intentions to undertake any procurement of that service ahead of the contract end. And then we have a number of sexual health services currently delivered or subcontracted by HCRG, so they're part of that community transformation programme, and new contracts are due to be in place by April 25. So that includes our clinic in a box, so that's our school, that's currently delivered by the school nursing service at HCRG, where they go into schools and provide a sexual health service to young people. It includes GP LARC provision, and it includes a number of sexual health interventions provided through community pharmacy, so including the C-card, emergency hormonal contraception, pregnancy testing and chlamydia treatment. So those are in the process of being recommissioned or recontracted from now, with an aim for contract commencement and those services to be in place by April 25. In terms of chlamydia screening, that is being commissioned for a separate contract with the NSSG. That has also been part of a procurement process. A provider has been identified. We're going through various governance processes to confirm that arrangement, and the expected timeline for award of the contract is by October 24, so very soon. And then we have the Women's Health Hub. That's not a physical identity. That's about bringing together existing services and professionals to work together to provide an integrated community offer. But we have been able to receive funding through that, along with Swindon and Wiltshire, to provide more training for LARC fitting, which is really positive. So that's an update on some of the commissioning. And then just briefly to mention the Sexual Health Action Plan. So we have a 2-year action plan. That includes a number of actions which are, of course, informed by where our needs and gaps are. Key actions include those around education, training and support, around the community transformation programme recommissioning exercise, a focus on specific communicable diseases, particularly late diagnosis of HIV, around intelligence and research, and then a number of actions focused on sexual health inequalities. So I'll pause there, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So do we have any questions on sexual health from any of our panel members? In that case, then I will just add my question. So you spoke about the work you're doing with schools. I just wondered whether or not you also work with our universities and also our colleges.
Yeah. Yes, we do. We work really closely with universities and colleges in a number of ways, so through meeting with them and forums, and we have a good relationship actually across public health. So we have a regular meeting where we talk about anything across public health that's kind of interest, or that may be an issue that we need to work in partnership on. So that's one way. And then in relation to sexual health specifically, an example is that we attend the Freshers' Fairs or the Welcome events. So we do those sorts of events regularly. And recently we've been doing some webinars with both professionals at universities and colleges, but also students, just to do a general update on anything that's helpful, including sexual health, including health protection, but it can be on other things as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's the actual framework itself is specific in some areas, such as live free from harms of tobacco, and very generic in good emotional health for all, which sort of is a catch-all for everything from not having a home at the moment to anything else that may be affecting your emotional well-being. Was the actual framework created based on what public health get for funding, or how did you actually come up with those particular things? Because obviously, you know, some people might say, well, warmth and shelter is far more important for my health than something else, but you might say, well, that's all right, it's under emotional. Just
That's a really interesting question. So the way that we came up with these, so these are our sort of health improvement aims that the system has come together on. The way that we came up with those was that we, in our first workshop with partners, we did a mapping exercise where the University of Bath led a process by where a group of, it was about 50 or so people, looked at the causes of all of the different factors associated with health improvement in BAMES. And from that, we were able to look at some of the common features, and we could look at the things that drove our health improvement outcomes. And we could then take that to our second workshop and say, this is what you as a group of partners said. How do we bring this together into what we want to achieve as a system around health improvement? So these are the aims that came out of that process. So this is not related to our funding per se. They obviously recognise some of the key drivers of poor health improvement outcomes, but they also relate to that mapping that the whole system did. Yeah, I hope that gives some explanation. So there was a process behind how we came up with those as aims and how we came up with the overarching vision of what we're trying to achieve, which fits very clearly under the health and wellbeing strategy. So it's section 3.2 of the health and wellbeing strategy in terms of its ambitions around what it wants for the population of BAMES.
so just as a quick follow-up. So if your networks came up with something more concrete or something a little different to this, would this change?
I think so this is our overarching framework for BAMES. If the networks themselves, so if we're working in a particular community, they may have very specific aims that they want to achieve for that community. But what I would hope is that they would recognise that what they want to achieve for their community contributes to our overarching health improvement aims for BAMES, which some partners have put together. If we're looking at that universal offer that we also need to grapple with in terms of how we improve health across BAMES for the whole population around health improvement outcomes, then I think these should be the things that the system, we should be listening to, because the system has told us these are the things that are important for us around that. So I'm not sure I've been very clear there. So I think within a network group, there will be things that they find more or less important than what we set out in the framework, but these are the things that the system partners and the evidence also tells us are really important in how we're going to drive health improvement ambitions across BAMES. I hope that helps. Sorry.
Thank you. So I just have one more point I wanted to raise on this item, which is, I think it's in 3.23. You state that you have an aim to go live on the 1st of April, and I just wanted to query that as an aim when the contract with HCRG finishes on the 31st of March. So what will happen if your aim doesn't materialise? Or is it just a wording issue? And it should be will. It should be will. Good, Will. Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. Right, no further questions on this item? One further question on this item. Paul. Paul, are you using your microphone?
I won't repeat everything. 2.3. So I'm really up for the idea that this PDS panel should champion individual items while looking at the whole lot as a whole as well. But for us to champion something, we really, and coming back to what Onkar said, we really do need a bit more detail in here about what we're aiming for to champion. And so I really would ask that you think about, again, about how you put some goals or aspirations or target, you put more detail onto that element of this report.
Thank you. And I think you're right. I think that we can come back and have some more specific asks in relation to that, and we will do that. And I know that we will in relation to social prescribing, for example, as that programme of work develops. We're still in kind of the early stages. And then I guess there's a more general ask where if there's work that you're aware of taking place in a council or in your communities that actually we should be aware of, then please do feel as though you can let us know. So thinking about, I mean, I link with Rob, Head of Service for Cultural Heritage a lot, but if you're aware of cultural and heritage interventions that can be brought into the social prescribing fold, we'd absolutely like to hear about them. I know Rob's really passionate about that as well, but we won't know everything. So yeah, I guess we need to be specific, we agree, and then there's that more general ask. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you as well, because I know this is the first time I think public health has come as a specific, discrete item, and I think it's been really interesting to explore in more detail the work that you do, and I think we will definitely schedule in another opportunity for you to come and share what next. So thank you again. Right, so I'm now going to move on to the Knife Crime Prevention Task Group update, which is in your papers. I think I'm going to introduce this item, because I am the chair of the task group, and so I would just like to say thank you first of all to everybody, both in this room and externally, who has been involved in this. It's been very interesting. It's been slightly more drawn out than I think we had expected because of two elections, one of which we could have predicted, which was the Police and Crime Commission elections, and the one that we couldn't, which was the general election. So, but that has slowed down our progress somewhat. But, so far it's been very interesting, and as outlined in the papers, it is quite clear that there's not going to be a simple easy solution that is going to lead to there being less knife crime in our area, or indeed across the country. But we have spoken to not just these people that are listed as the ones that have been interviewed by the task group, but also others. We've, I think, separately have attended a variety of presentations that have been aimed at both communities and families, to hear directly from parents who have been affected either because they were parents of those that were the victims, or indeed those that were carrying the knives themselves as well. So it has been, I would say, not just interesting, but also very, I think, emotionally quite challenging as well. So we have got at least one group that we have yet to speak to, which is the early years and early intervention piece, because it's been very clear from all the conversations that we've had that it's not just a case of not giving young people access to knives. Actually, there's a lot more about how they have come to this point in their lives, and so are therefore vulnerable to being involved in such activities. So that's one area that we still need to explore, but I would just be interested from your perspectives as panel members, if there are other areas of work that you think we might have missed out on, or just other thoughts that you might have about this piece of work, which sadly remains topical. So Paul and then Joanna.
Thank you very much. I think in next steps, I think there has to be a conversation with our cabinet member in developing next year's budget on how we get some money into the budget to actually take this forward to the next steps, because the next steps will cost some money. So it would be a sadness, not just for the council but for the community, if we came up with some recommendations which could be debated, but which there was no money available to implement those recommendations. So I think there needs to be a discussion between the working group and the cabinet member on what is needed for the budget next year, if anything, and if the answer comes back from that nothing is needed, then that's fine. But I think it needs to be a task you do with the cabinet member in advance of the budget in February. And the second thing is there an analysis of the cost to society of what knife crime has done? So in terms of police time, social service time, NHS time, do we know what knife crime already costs us, so that we can balance that with actually targets to reduce knife crime? My two questions.
Thank you, Paul. And I would just come back and settle on your first point about the budget implications, because I think it's not just for the council and therefore for individual cabinet members, but there's also the probability that there will be cost implications for other organisations, for example, the police or indeed public health partners as well. So I'll take on board that. And the analysis of knife crime and the cost implications, we will have to look into that. There are obviously cost implications of crime per se, but I don't know whether or not this has been analysed in quite the way that you have asked for. So we will look into that. Thank you, Paul. Very good questions. Would you like to turn your microphone off, though? Joanna.
Thank you. Fully support Councillor Crossley's points about costs. But also, is there a gender issue here too? And do people who are young now not go out because they are frightened because of the situation, that they can see that there is crime, there are knives around, and therefore I certainly know that we've had lots of motions about supporting women at night and the nighttime community because of feeling vulnerable. So who is more crime, knife, say that girls aren't frightened by it and they therefore don't go out. It's how do you measure that too? What decisions are people making? And then also going back to families, I'm certainly aware as a parent that there are a lot of parents out there who are genuinely worried about this subject and want to have some kind of co-production conversation with the various groups about what is out there. How do we work together as communities to discuss this, how do we talk to our young people before they go out, there are a whole kind of questions there for families and how they position themselves within that community, going back to my earlier comment about the family as the first criminal cell. So how do we do that culturally? And then also, how do we support young people at this time with clearly what are considered serious situations? I know I regularly say to my children, are you making decisions because you are aware of knife crime? So if I'm doing that, who else is doing that? And what are the impacts?
Thank you. And I think that sort of goes to some of those conversations that were started at the various community events, which I think were aimed at parents, but I don't know how many other people from the community may have attended. So I think that's a piece of work that we might want to just examine a little bit more. So thank you. Very useful comments. Any other points anybody else wants to add to our list, or other concerns or other areas that you think we've just not even thought about? Kevin, I got there before you put your hand up.
Well, no, I was just reflecting on your 3.4 terms of reference, and just wondered how have you managed to cover all those particular points now in your meetings, or do you feel there are still areas that you've yet to sort of nail or finish off?
Thank you. It's a good question. I think my reflection is the one that we are focusing on, which I hope you would approve of, is considering the opportunities to improve prevention of knife crime. And I think that's the area, you know, we have heard about the current position, albeit it was probably at the start of this piece of work, but we have been focusing more and more on what more we can do, not just as a council, but collectively, you know, whether or not it's in community groups or with the police or wherever, about what more can be done to prevent knife crime. And actually, it's a little bit, a few seconds late, Joe, but I was just thinking also there is some thought about women now who are taking some, you know, maybe a weapon with them because they feel unsafe, and then that is used against them. And I think that came out in a recent police investigation, but it might not fit in with our particular remit, but it's something to think about as well, about, you know, who is afraid and what they're doing about it.
My other question too would be county lines. How impactful are county lines and drugs on the decisions that knife crime exists, and do we have any understanding of that, and is that being examined?
I would say yes, but it's not the only driver. But, you know, yes, we can definitely draw that out more in our sort of final report. Okay, Becky.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just remembering also that the needs assessment on knife crime and serious violence came to this panel a while ago, didn't it, to the children's panel, and that work was presented. There is an overarching number of priorities. There are now 4 priorities that have been identified to be worked on for a multi-agency partnership group, and I'm wondering whether the panel would like at some point the action plan that is now being developed, that's being led by Children's Services. It might be useful for that to come back here, and that might address some of the questions that you're asking possibly.
Thank you. And I think actually our task group also, I think, would welcome that as a reminder that, you know, we're not doing this on our own. So, thank you. Okay. Any more comments on that item? Okay, well, thank you everybody for your input. We now move on to the last item, which is our work plan. And obviously we spoke before about what...
Can we have any other business? Because there isn't that on the agenda.
Well, there isn't any other business, but you can say it in terms of what you might want to see on the work plan.
Thank you, then. I guess I would raise the issue that yesterday we had an event at Alice Park, of which somebody was invited to who was in a wheelchair, and they were unable to attend the event because although they had booked a taxi, there were no wheelchair taxis available. And that seems to me quite shocking in a city where we should have lots of availability to support people who are unable to easily travel. And we saw yesterday at an event that was the case, that somebody was not able to attend. So I just wonder how we approach that, and how do we raise that issue up through the council?
That's a very good question, Joanna. I don't know whether or not how much input we have, you know, how much input perhaps Adult Social Care has in our licensing role as a council, but it has come up a number of times. I know residents and others have spoken to me to say that they cannot, you know, it's almost like they're trapped in their own homes now because they can't easily get to other things. So is that something that you are aware of, Suzanne and Alison?
Yeah, thank you for that, Joanna. I am aware of it because a couple of things have happened recently where I've become aware of lack of accessibility, whether it's taxis or more recently it was actually a fire alarm in the Civic and somebody who didn't know how to get out because we hadn't prepared it well. But there's other examples as well. So I'm just trying to think about who to take it to and who to speak to. Can I take it away and have a conversation, and then I'll know who the right person is to speak to about just general accessibility, whether it's transport or footpaths or buildings or whatever. Because there is a lead within the council, but I need to find out more about it. But it's certainly on my radar at the moment.
Certainly at the end of the Paralympic Games.
So you've got the Paralympic Games, you've also got, the Grenfell inquiry as well. So I think there's a whole range.
We do need to look at all that. And then I have another point, and I'm really not trying to be political, and I did mention this to Councillor Moss before he left, but we are aware that this new government is about to change winter fuel payments, and there will be some impact on a certain group of residents that, and we know from the last few years that we've had to really think about heating homes and warm areas to provide. I guess there is a health impact on that group of people coming up this winter. Again, how are we as a local authority preparing for that outcome? I recognise that there might be other things that come through the budget that are different, that help with that, but we don't know. At the moment, we do know this.
So I assume that's something that you're factoring in. I don't know when this is going to come out in the budget, isn't it? The autumn statement. Yeah, so we can bring it back in November because we don't know whether or not it will actually go through, because obviously there's been quite a lot of anger and outcry, I think, on this.
Could I ask that there could be something on the work plan to that effect? Because I do think that it's, it will be winter, it will be an important issue that will be on an ongoing discussion anyway.
Yes, absolutely, and we can maybe tie it in with an update on warm places, etc., etc. Okay. Anything else that people want to add to the work plan? No? In fact, one thing I do want to do, so I'm going to just go back to the previous item on knife crime. My Vice Chair did give me a note, which I failed to read out, but it is just an area that we do want to just consider as well, which is around young people who are involved in serious violence and knife crime, and an above average number of fixed and permanent school exclusions, and the fact that high-risk individuals tend to be overrepresented in these groups. So that's just another area that I think we should explore in our sort of final part of that piece of work. So my apologies to Liz for not reading that out at the appropriate moment. Okay, anything else from anybody else? Otherwise, I am preparing to close this meeting. Okay, the meeting is now